Chapter 9 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 2, Cleric in Naples. Chapter 9. Part 1. I had no difficulty in answering the various questions which Dr. Gennaro addressed to me, but I was surprised and even displeased at the constant peals of laughter with which he received my answers. The piteous description of miserable Calabria, and the picture of the sad situation of the Bishop of Martorano, appeared to me more likely to call forth tears than to excite hilarity, and, suspecting that some mystification was being played upon me, I was very near getting angry when, becoming more composed, he told me with feeling that I must kindly excuse him, that his laughter was a disease which seemed to be endemic in his family, for one of his uncles died of it. "What?" I exclaimed. "Died of laughing?" "Yes, this disease, which was not known to Hippocrates, is called liflati." "What do you mean? Does an hypochondriac affection, which causes sadness and lowness in all those who suffer from it, render you cheerful?" "Yes, because most likely my flati, instead of influencing the hypochondrium, affects my spleen, which my physician asserts to be the organ of laughter. It is quite a discovery." "You are mistaken. It is a very ancient notion, and it is the only function which is ascribed to the spleen in our animal organization. Well, we must discuss the matter at length, for I hope you will remain with us a few weeks." "I wish I could, but I must leave Naples tomorrow or the day after." "Have you got any money?" "I rely upon the 60 ducats you have to give me." At these words his peals of laughter began again, and as he could see that I was annoyed, he said, "I am amused at the idea that I can keep you here as long as I like. But be good enough to see my son. He writes pretty verses enough." And truly his son, although only 14, was already a great poet. A servant took me to the apartment of the young man, whom I found possessed of a pleasing countenance and engaging manners. He gave me a polite welcome, and begged to be excused if he could not attend to me altogether for the present, as he had to finish a song which he was composing for a relative of the Duchess de Rovino, who was taking the veil at the convent of St. Clair, and the printer was waiting for the manuscript. I told him that his excuse was a very good one, and I offered to assist him. He then read his song, and I found it so full of enthusiasm, and so truly in the style of Guidi, that I advised him to call it an ode, but as I had praised all the truly beautiful passages, I thought I could venture to point out the weak ones, and I replaced them by verses of my own composition. He was delighted, and thanked me warmly, inquiring whether I was Apollo. As he was writing his ode, I composed a sonnet on the same subject, and, expressing his admiration for it, he begged me to sign it, and to allow him to send it with his poetry. While I was correcting and recopying my manuscript, he went to his father to find out who I was, which made the old man laugh until supper time. In the evening I had the pleasure of seeing that my bed had been prepared in the young man's chamber. Dr. Gennaro's family was composed of this son, and of a daughter unfortunately very plain, and of his wife, and of 2 elderly devout sisters. Amongst the guests at the supper table I met several literary men, and the Marquis Galliani, who was at that time annotating Vitruvius. He had a brother, an abbé whose acquaintance I made 20 years after, in Paris, when he was secretary of embassy to Count Cantillano. The next day, at supper, I was presented to the celebrated Genovese. I had already sent him the letter of the Archbishop of Cosenza. He spoke to me of Apostolo Zeno and of the Abbé Conti. He remarked that it was considered a very venial sin for a regular priest to say 2 masses in one day for the sake of earning 2 carlini more, but that for the same sin a secular priest would deserve to be burnt at the stake. The nun took the veil on the following day, and Gennaro's ode and my sonnet had the greatest success. A Neapolitan gentleman, whose name was the same as mine, expressed a wish to know me, and, hearing that I resided at the doctor's, he called to congratulate him on the occasion of his feast day, which happened to fall on the day following the ceremony at St. Clair. Don Antonio Casanova, informing me of his name, inquired whether my family was originally from Venice. "I am, sir," I answered modestly, "the great-grandson of the unfortunate Marco Antonio Casanova, secretary to Cardinal Pompeo Colonna, who died of the plague in Rome in the year 1528, under the pontificate of Clement VII. The words were scarcely out of my lips when he embraced me, calling me his cousin, but we all thought that Dr. Gennaro would actually die with laughter, for it seemed impossible to laugh so immoderately with risk of life. Madame Gennaro was very angry and told my newly found cousin that he might have avoided enacting such a scene before her husband, knowing his disease, but he answered that he never thought the circumstance likely to provoke mirth. I said nothing, for, in reality, I felt that the recognition was very comic. Our poor laughter having recovered his composure, Casanova, who had remained very serious, invited me to dinner for the next day with my young friend Paul Gennaro, who had already become my alter ego. When we called at his house, my worthy cousin showed me his family tree, beginning with a Don Francisco, brother of Don Juan. In my pedigree, which I knew by heart, Don Juan, my direct ancestor, was a posthumous child. It was possible that there might have been a brother of Marco Antonio's, but when he heard that my genealogy began with Don Francisco from Aragon, who had lived in the 14th century, and that consequently all the pedigree of the illustrious house of the Casanovas of Saragossa belonged to him, his joy knew no bounds. He did not know what to do to convince me that the same blood was flowing in his veins and in mine. He expressed some curiosity to know what lucky accident had brought me to Naples. I told him that, having embraced the ecclesiastical profession, I was going to Rome to seek my fortune. He then presented me to his family, and I thought that I could read on the countenance of my cousin, his dearly beloved wife, that she was not much pleased with the newly found relationship, but his pretty daughter and a still prettier niece of his might very easily have given me faith in the doctrine that blood is thicker than water, however fabulous it may be. After dinner, Don Antonio informed me that the Duchess de Bovino had expressed a wish to know the Abbé Casanova, who had written the sonnet in honor of her relative, and that he would be very happy to introduce me to her as his own cousin. As we were alone at that moment, I begged he would not insist on presenting me, as I was only provided with travelling suits and had to be careful of my purse so as not to arrive in Rome without money. Delighted at my confidence and approving my economy, he said, "I am rich, and you must not scruple to come with me to my tailor." And he accompanied his offer with an assurance that the circumstance would not be known to anyone, and that he would feel deeply mortified if I denied him the pleasure of serving me. I shook him warmly by the hand, and answered that I was ready to do anything he pleased. We went to a tailor who took my measure, and who brought me on the following day everything necessary to the toilet of the most elegant abbé. Don Antonio called on me and remained to dine with Don Gennaro, after which he took me and my friend Paul to the Duchess. This lady, according to the Neapolitan fashion, called me thou in her very first compliment of welcome. Her daughter, then only 10 or 12 years old, and a few years later became Duchess de Matalona. The Duchess presented me with a snuff-box in pale tortoiseshell, with arabesque incrustations in gold, and she invited us to dine with her on the morrow, promising to take us after dinner to the convent of St. Clare to pay a visit to the new nun. As we came out of the palace of the Duchess, I left my friends and went alone to Panagiotti's to claim the barrel of muscatel wine. The manager was kind enough to have the barrel divided into 2 smaller casks of equal capacity, and I sent one to Don Antonio and the other to Don Gennaro. As I was leaving the shop, I met the worthy Panagiotti, who was glad to see me. Was I to blush at the sight of the good man I had at first deceived? No, for in his opinion I had acted very nobly towards him. Don Gennaro, as I returned home, managed to thank me for my handsome present without laughing, and the next day Don Antonio, to make up for the muscatel wine I had sent him, offered me a gold-headed cane worth at least 15 ounces, and his tailor brought me a travelling suit and a blue great-coat with the buttonholes in gold lace. I therefore found myself splendidly equipped. At the Duchess de Bovino's dinner I made the acquaintance of the wisest and most learned man in Naples, the illustrious Don Lelio Carafa, who belonged to the ducal family of Matalona, and whom King Carlos honored with the title of friend. I spent 2 delightful hours in the convent parlor, coping successfully with the curiosity of all the nuns who were pressing against the grating. Had destiny allowed me to remain in Naples, my fortune would have been made, but, although I had no fixed plan, the voice of fate summoned me to Rome, and therefore I resisted all the entreaties of my cousin Antonio to accept the honorable position of tutor in several houses of the highest order. Don Antonio gave a splendid dinner in my honor, but he was annoyed and angry because he saw that his wife looked daggers at her new cousin. I thought that, more than once, she cast a glance at my new costume, and then whispered to the guest next to her. Very likely she knew what had taken place. There are some positions in life to which I could never be reconciled. If, in the most brilliant circle, there is one person who affects to stare at me, I lose all presence of mind. Self-dignity feels outraged. My wit dies away, and I play the part of a dolt. It is a weakness on my part, but a weakness I cannot overcome. Don Lelio Caraffa offered me a very liberal salary if I would undertake the education of his nephew, the Duke de Matalona, then 10 years of age. I expressed my gratitude, and begged him to be my true benefactor in a different manner, namely by giving me a few good letters of introduction for Rome, a favor which he granted at once. He gave me one for Cardinal Acquaviva, and another for Father Giorgi. I found out that the interest felt towards me by my friends had induced them to obtain for me the honor of kissing the hand of Her Majesty the Queen, and I hastened my preparations to leave Naples, for the Queen would certainly have asked me some questions, and I could not have avoided telling her that I had just left Martorano and the poor bishop whom she had sent there. The Queen likewise knew my mother. She would very likely have alluded to my mother's profession in Dresden. It would have mortified Don Antonio, and my pedigree would have been covered with ridicule. I knew the force of prejudice. I should have been ruined, and I felt I should do well to withdraw in good time. As I took leave of him, Don Antonio presented me with a fine gold watch, and gave me a letter for Don Gaspar Vivaldi, whom he called his best friend. Don Gennaro paid me the 60 ducats, and his son, swearing eternal friendship, asked me to write to him. They all accompanied me to the coach, blending their tears with mine, and loading me with good wishes and blessings. From my landing in Chiozza up to my arrival in Naples, fortune had seemed bent upon frowning on me. In Naples it began to shew itself less adverse, and on my return to that city it entirely smiled upon me. Naples has always been a fortunate place for me, as the reader of my memoirs will discover. My readers must not forget that in Pozzi I was on the point of disgracing myself, and there is no remedy against the degradation of the mind, for nothing can restore it to its former standard. It is a case of disheartening atony for which there is no possible cure. I was not ungrateful to the good bishop of Martorano, for if he had unwittingly injured me by summoning me to his diocese, I felt that to his letter for Mr. Gennaro I was indebted for all the good fortune which had just befallen me. I wrote to him from Rome. I was wholly engaged in drying my tears as we were driving through the beautiful street of Toledo, and it was only after we had left Naples that I could find time to examine the countenance of my travelling companions. Next to me I saw a man of from 40 to 50, with a pleasing face and a lively air, but opposite to me, 2 charming faces delighted my eyes. They belonged to 2 ladies, young and pretty, very well dressed, with a look of candor and modesty. This discovery was most agreeable, but I felt sad and I wanted calm and silence. We reached Avessa without one word being exchanged, and as the vetturino stopped there only to water his mules, we did not get out of the coach. From Avessa to Capua, my companions conversed almost without interruption, and, wonderful to relate, I did not open my lips once. I was amused by the Neapolitan jargon of the gentlemen, and by the pretty accent of the ladies, who were evidently Romans. It was a most wonderful feat for me to remain 5 hours before 2 charming women without addressing one word to them, without paying them one compliment. At Capua, where we were to spend the night, we put up at an inn, and we were shown into a room with 2 beds, a very usual thing in Italy. The Neapolitan, addressing himself to me, said, "Am I to have the honor of sleeping with the reverend gentleman?" I answered in a very serious tone that it was for him to choose or to arrange it otherwise if he liked. The answer made the 2 ladies smile, particularly the one whom I preferred, and it seemed to me a good omen. We were 5 at supper, for it is usual for the vetturino to supply his travellers with their meals, unless some private agreement is made otherwise, and to sit down at table with them. In the desultory talk which went on during the supper, I found in my travelling companions decorum, propriety, wit, and the manners of persons accustomed to good society. I became curious to know who they were, and going down with the driver after supper, I asked him. The gentleman, he told me, is an advocate, and one of the ladies is his wife, but I do not know which of the two. I went back to our room, and I was polite enough to go to bed first, in order to make it easier for the ladies to undress themselves with freedom. I likewise got up first in the morning, left the room, and only returned when I was called for breakfast. The coffee was delicious. I praised it highly, and the lady, the one who was my favorite, promised that I should have the same every morning during our journey. The barber came in after breakfast, the advocate was shaved, and the barber offered me his services, which I declined, but the rogue declared that it was slovenly to wear one's beard. When we had resumed our seats in the coach, the advocate made some remark upon the impudence of barbers in general. But we ought to decide first, said the lady, whether or not it is slovenly to go bearded. Of course it is, said the advocate. Beard is nothing but a dirty excrescence. You may think so, I answered, but everybody does not share your opinion. Do we consider as a dirty excrescence the hair of which we take so much care, and which is of the same nature as the beard? Far from it. We admire the length and the beauty of the hair. Then, remarked the lady, the barber is a fool. But after all, I asked, have I any beard? I thought you had, she answered. In that case, I will begin to shave as soon as I reach Rome, for this is the first time that I have been convicted of having a beard. My dear wife, exclaimed the advocate, you should have held your tongue. Perhaps the Reverend Abbé is going to Rome with the intention of becoming a Capuchin friar. The pleasantry made me laugh, but, unwilling that he should have the last word, I answered that he had guessed rightly, that such had been my intention, but that I had entirely altered my mind since I had seen his wife. Oh, you are wrong, said the joyous Neapolitan, for my wife is very fond of Capuchins, and if you wish to please her, you had better follow your original vocation. Our conversation continued in the same tone of pleasantry, and the day passed off in an agreeable manner. In the evening we had a very poor supper at Garelin, but we made up for it by cheerfulness and witty conversation. My dawning inclination for the advocate's wife borrowed strength from the affectionate manner she displayed towards me. The next day she asked me, after we had resumed our journey, whether I intended to make a long stay in Rome before returning to Venice. I answered that, having no acquaintances in Rome, I was afraid my life there might be very dull. Strangers are liked in Rome, she said. I feel certain that you will be pleased with your residence in that city. May I hope, madam, that you will allow me to pay you my respects? We shall be honored by your calling on us, said the advocate. My eyes were fixed upon his charming wife. She blushed, but I did not appear to notice it. I kept up the conversation, and the day passed as pleasantly as the previous one. We stopped at Terracina, where they gave us a room with 3 beds, 2 single beds, and a larger one between the 2 others. It was natural that the 2 sisters should take the large bed. They did so, and undressed themselves while the advocate and I went on talking at the table, with our backs turned to them. As soon as they had gone to rest, the advocate took the bed on which he found his nightcap, and I the other, which was only about 1 foot distant from the large bed. I remarked that the lady by whom I was captivated was on the side nearest my couch, and, without much vanity, I could suppose that it was not owing only to chance. I put the light out and laid down, revolving in my mind a project which I could not abandon, and yet durst not execute. In vain did I court sleep. A very faint light enabled me to perceive the bed in which the pretty woman was lying, and my eyes would, in spite of myself, remain open. It would be difficult to guess what I might have done at last. I had already fought a hard battle with myself for more than an hour, when I saw her rise, get out of her bed, and go and lay herself down near her husband, who, most likely, did not wake up, and continued to sleep in peace, for I did not hear any noise. Vexed, disgusted, I tried to compose myself to sleep, and I woke only at daybreak. Seeing the beautiful wandering star in her own bed, I got up, dressed myself in haste, and went out, leaving all my companions fast asleep. I returned to the inn only at the time fixed for our departure, and I found the advocate and the 2 ladies already in the coach, waiting for me. The lady complained, in a very obliging manner, of my not having cared for her coffee. I pleaded as an excuse a desire for an early walk, and I took care not to honor her even with a look. I feigned to be suffering from the toothache, and remained in my corner, dull and silent. At Piperno, she managed to whisper to me that my toothache was all sham. I was pleased with the reproach, because it heralded an explanation which I craved for, in spite of my vexation. I was morose and silent until we reached Serinonetta, where we were to pass the night. We arrived early, and the weather being fine, the lady said that she could enjoy a walk, and asked me politely to offer her my arm. I did so, for it would have been rude to refuse. Besides, I had had enough of my sulking fit. An explanation could alone bring matters back to their original standing, but I did not know how to force it upon the lady. Her husband followed us at some distance with the sister. When we were far enough in advance, I ventured to ask her why she had supposed my toothache to have been feigned. "I am very candid," she said. "It is because the difference in your manner was so marked, and because you were so careful to avoid looking at me through the whole day. A toothache would not have prevented you from being polite, and therefore I thought it had been feigned for some purpose. But I am certain that not one of us can possibly have given you any grounds for such a rapid change in your manner. Yet something must have caused the change, and you, madam, are only half sincere." "You are mistaken, sir. I am entirely sincere. If I have given you any motive for anger, I am and must remain ignorant of it. Be good enough to tell me what I have done." "Nothing, for I have no right to complain." "Yes, you have. You have a right, the same that I have myself, the right which good society grants to every one of its members. Speak, and show yourself as sincere as I am." "You are certainly bound not to know, or to pretend not to know the real cause, but you must acknowledge that my duty is to remain silent." "Very well. Now it is all over. But your duty bids you to conceal the cause of your bad humor. It also bids you not to show it. Delicacy sometimes enforces upon a polite gentleman the necessity of concealing certain feelings which might implicate either himself or others. It is a restraint for the mind, I confess, but it has some advantage when its effect is to render more amiable the man who forces himself to accept that restraint." Her close argument made me blush for shame, and carrying her beautiful hand to my lips, I confessed myself in the wrong. "You would see me at your feet," I exclaimed, "in token of my repentance, were I not afraid of injuring you." "Do not let us allude to the matter any more," she answered. And pleased with my repentance, she gave me a look so excessive of forgiveness that, without being afraid of augmenting my guilt, I took my lips off her hand, and I raised them to her half-open, smiling mouth. Intoxicated with rapture, I passed so rapidly from a state of sadness to one of overwhelming cheerfulness, that during our supper the advocate enjoyed 1,000 jokes upon my toothache, so quickly cured by the simple remedy of a walk. On the following day we dined at Velletri and slept in Marino, where, although the town was full of troops, we had 2 small rooms and a good supper. I could not have been on better terms with my charming Roman, for, although I had received but a rapid proof of her regard, it had been such a true one, such a tender one. In the coach our eyes could not say much, but I was opposite to her, and our feet spoke a very eloquent language. The advocate had told me that he was going to Rome on some ecclesiastical business, and that he intended to reside in the house of mother-in-law, whom his wife had not seen since her marriage 2 years ago, and her sister hoped to remain in Rome, where she expected to marry a clerk at the Spirito Santo Bank. He gave me their address, with a pressing invitation to call upon them, and I promised to devote all my spare time to them. We were enjoying our dessert when my beautiful lady-love, admiring my snuff-box, told her husband that she wished she had one like it. "I will buy you one, dear." "Then buy mine," I said. "I will let you have it for 20 ounces, and you can give me a note of hand payable to bearer in payment. I owe that amount to an Englishman, and I will give it him to redeem my debt." "Your snuff-box, my dear Abby, is worth 20 ounces, but I cannot buy it unless you agree to receive payment in cash. I should be delighted to see it in my wife's possession, and she would keep it as a remembrance of you." His wife, thinking that I would not accept his offer, said that she had no objection to give me the note of hand. "But," exclaimed the advocate, "can you not guess the Englishman exists only in our friend's imagination? He would never enter an appearance, and we would have the snuff-box for nothing. Do not trust the abbé, my dear. He is a great cheat." "I had no idea," answered his wife, looking at me, "that the world contained rogues of this species." I affected a melancholy air, and said that I only wished myself rich enough to be often guilty of such cheating. When a man is in love, very little is enough to throw him into despair, and as little to enhance his joy to the utmost. There was but one bed in the room where supper had been served, and another in a small closet leading out of the room, but without a door. The ladies chose the closet, and the advocate retired to rest before me. I bid the ladies good night as soon as they had gone to bed. I looked at my dear mistress, and after undressing myself I went to bed, intending not to sleep through the night. But the reader may imagine my rage when I found, as I got into the bed, that it creaked loud enough to wake the dead. I waited, however, quite motionless until my companion should be fast asleep, and as soon as his snoring told me that he was entirely under the influence of Morpheus, I tried to slip out of the bed. But the infernal creaking which took place whenever I moved woke my companion, who felt about with his hand, and finding me near him, went to sleep again. Half an hour after, I tried a second time, but with the same result. I had to give up in despair. Love is the most cunning of gods. In the midst of obstacles he seems to be in his own element, but as his very existence depends upon the enjoyment of those who ardently worship him, the shrewd, all-seeing, little blind god contrives to bring success out of the most desperate case. I had given up all hope for the night, and had nearly gone to sleep, when suddenly we hear a dreadful noise. Guns are fired in the street, people, screaming and howling, are running up and down the stairs. At last there is a loud knocking at our door. The advocate, frightened out of his slumbers, asks me what it can all mean. I pretend to be very indifferent, and beg to be allowed to sleep. But the ladies are trembling with fear and loudly calling for a light. I remain very quiet. The advocate jumps out of bed, and runs out of the room to obtain a candle. I rise at once. I follow him to shut the door, but I slam it rather too hard. The double spring of the lock gives way, and the door cannot be reopened without the key. I approach the ladies in order to calm their anxiety, telling them that the advocate would soon return with a light, and that we should then know the cause of the tumult. But I am not losing my time, and am at work while I am speaking. I meet with very little opposition, but, leaning rather too heavily upon my fair lady, I break through the bottom of the bedstead, and we suddenly find ourselves, the two ladies and myself, all together in a heap on the floor. The advocate comes back and knocks at the door. The sister gets up. I obey the prayers of my charming friend, and, feeling my way, reach the door, and tell the advocate that I cannot open it, and that he must get the key. The two sisters are behind me. I extend my hand, but I am abruptly repulsed, and judge that I have addressed myself to the wrong quarter. I go to the other side, and there I am better received. But the husband returns. The noise of the key in the lock announces that the door is going to be opened, and we return to our respective beds. The advocate hurries to the bed of the two frightened ladies, thinking of relieving their anxiety, but when he sees them buried in their broken-down bedstead, he bursts into a loud laugh. He tells me to come and have a look at them, but I am very modest, and decline the invitation. He then tells us that the alarm has been caused by a German detachment attacking suddenly the Spanish troops in the city, and that the Spaniards are running away. In a quarter of an hour the noise has ceased, and quiet is entirely re-established. The advocate complimented me upon my coolness, got into bed again, and was soon asleep. As for me, I was careful not to close my eyes, and as soon as I saw daylight, I got up in order to perform certain ablutions and to change my shirt. It was an absolute necessity. I returned for breakfast, and while we were drinking the delicious coffee which Donna Lucrezia had made, as I thought, better than ever, I remarked that her sister frowned on me. But how little I cared for her anger when I saw the cheerful, happy countenance and the approving looks of my adored Lucrezia. I felt a delightful sensation run through the whole of my body. End of Chapter 9, Part 1. Recording by Stephanie Dupal de Martin. Chapter 9 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stephanie Dupal de Martin. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 2, Cleric in Naples, Chapter 9, Part 2. We reached Rome very early, and the advocate being in a very gay mood, I assumed the same tone, loading him with compliments and predicting that a son would be born to him. I compelled his wife to promise it should be so. I did not forget the sister of my charming Lucrezia, and to make her change her hostile attitude towards me, I addressed to her so many pretty compliments and behaved in such a friendly manner that she was compelled to forgive the fall of the bed. As I took leave of them, I promised to give them a call on the following day. I was in Rome with a good wardrobe, pretty well supplied with money and jewelry, not wanting in experience, and with excellent letters of introduction. I was free, my own master, and just reaching the age in which a man can have faith in his own fortune, provided he is not deficient in courage and is blessed with a face likely to attract the sympathy of those he mixes with. I was not handsome, but I had something better than beauty. A striking expression which almost compelled a kind interest in my favor, and I felt myself ready for anything. I knew that Rome is the one city in which a man can begin from the lowest rung and reach the very top of the social ladder. This knowledge increased my courage, and I must confess that a most inveterate feeling of self-esteem which, on account of my inexperience, I could not distrust, enhanced wonderfully my confidence in myself. The man who intends to make his fortune in this ancient capital of the world must be a chameleon susceptible of reflecting all the colors of the atmosphere that surrounds him, a Proteus apt to assume every form, every shape. He must be supple, flexible, insinuating, close, inscrutable, often base, sometimes sincere, sometimes perfidious, always concealing a part of his knowledge, indulging in one tone of voice, patient, a perfect master of his own countenance, as cold as ice, when any other man will be all fire. And if unfortunately he is not religious at heart, a very common occurrence for a soul possessing the above requisites, he must have religion in his mind, that is to say, on his face, on his lips, in his manners. He must suffer quietly, if he be an honest man, the necessity of knowing himself an arrant hypocrite. The man whose soul would loathe such life should leave Rome and seek his fortune elsewhere. I do not know whether I am praising or excusing myself, but of all those qualities I possess but one, namely flexibility. For the rest, I was only an interesting, heedless young fellow, a pretty good blood horse, but not broken, or rather badly broken, and that is much worse. I began by delivering the letter I had received from Don Lelio for Father Giorgi. The learned monk enjoyed the esteem of everyone in Rome, and the Pope himself had a great consideration for him, because he disliked the Jesuits, and did not put a mask on to tear the mask from their faces, although they deemed themselves powerful enough to despise him. He read the letter with great attention, and expressed himself disposed to be my adviser, and that consequently I might make him responsible for any evil which might befall me, as misfortune is not to be feared by a man who acts rightly. He asked me what I intended to do in Rome, and I answered that I wished him to tell me what to do. "Perhaps I may, but in that case you must come and see me often, and never conceal from me anything, you understand, not anything, of what interests you or of what happens to you." Don Lelio has likewise given me a letter for the Cardinal Acquaviva. I congratulate you. The Cardinal's influence in Rome is greater even than that of the Pope. Must I deliver the letter at once? No. I will see him this evening, and prepare him for your visit. Call on me tomorrow morning, and I will then tell you where and when you are to deliver your letter to the Cardinal. Have you any money? Enough for all my wants during 1 year? That is well. Have you any acquaintances? Not one. Do not make any without first consulting me, and, above all, avoid coffee-houses and ordinaries. But if you should happen to frequent such places, listen and never speak. Be careful to form your judgment upon those who ask any questions from you, and if common civility obliges you to give an answer, give only an evasive one if any other is likely to commit you. Do you speak French? Not one word. I am sorry for that. You must learn French. Have you been a student? A poor one, but I have a sufficient smattering to converse with ordinary company. That is enough. But be very prudent, for Rome is the city in which smatterers unmask each other, and are always at war amongst themselves. I hope you will take your letter to the Cardinal, dressed like a modest abbé, and not in this elegant costume which is not likely to conjure fortune. Adieu. Let me see you tomorrow. Highly pleased with the welcome I had received at his hands, and with all he had said to me, I left his house and proceeded towards Campo di Fiori to deliver the letter of my cousin Antonio to Don Gaspar Vivaldi, who received me in his library, where I met two respectable-looking priests. He gave me the most friendly welcome, asked for my address, and invited me to dinner for the next day. He praised Father Giorgi most highly, and accompanying me as far as the stairs, he told me that he would give me on the morrow the amount his friend Don Antonio requested to hand me. More money which my generous cousin was bestowing on me. It is easy enough to give away when one possesses sufficient means to do it, but it is not every man who knows how to give. I found the proceeding of Don Antonio more delicate even than generous. I could not refuse his present. It was my duty to prove my gratitude by accepting it. Just after I had left Monsieur Vivaldi's house, I found myself face to face with Stefano, and this extraordinary original loaded me with friendly caresses. I inwardly despised him, yet I could not feel hatred for him. I looked upon him as the instrument which Providence had been pleased to employ in order to save me from ruin. After telling me that he had obtained from the Pope all he wished, he advised me to avoid meeting the fatal constable who had advanced me 2 sequins in Seraval, because he had found out that I had deceived him, and had sworn revenge against me. I asked Stefano to induce the man to leave my acknowledgment of the debt in the hands of a certain merchant whom we both knew, and that I would call there to discharge the amount. This was done, and it ended the affair. That evening I dined at the ordinary, which was frequented by Romans and foreigners, but I carefully followed the advice of Father Giorgi. I heard a great deal of harsh language used against the Pope and against the Cardinal Minister, who had caused the Papal States to be inundated by 80,000 men, Germans as well as Spaniards. But I was much surprised when I saw that everybody was eating meat, although it was Saturday. But a stranger during the first few days after his arrival in Rome is surrounded with many things which at first cause surprise, and to which he soon gets accustomed. There is not a Catholic city in the world in which a man is half so free on religious matters as in Rome. The inhabitants of Rome are like the men employed at the government tobacco works, who are allowed to take gratis as much tobacco as they want for their own use. One can live in Rome with the most complete freedom, except that the Ordini Santissimi are as much to be dreaded as the famous lettres de cachet. Before the Revolution came and destroyed them, and shewed the whole world the general character of the French nation. The next day, the 1st of October, 1743, I made up my mind to be shaved. The down on my chin had become beard. I judged that it was time to renounce some of the privileges enjoyed by adolescence. I dressed myself completely in the Roman fashion, and Father Giorgi was highly pleased when he saw me in that costume, which had been made by the tailor of my dear cousin, Don Antonio. Father Giorgi invited me to take a cup of chocolate with him, and informed me that the Cardinal had been apprised of my arrival by a letter from Don Lelio, and that his Eminence would receive me at noon at the Villa Negroni, where he would be taking a walk. I told Father Giorgi that I had been invited to dinner by Monsieur Vivaldi. He advised me to cultivate his acquaintance. I proceeded to the Villa Negroni. The moment he saw me, the Cardinal stopped to receive my letter, allowing 2 persons who accompanied him to walk forward. He put the letter in his pocket without reading it, examined me for 1 or 2 minutes, and inquired whether I felt any taste for politics. I answered that, until now, I had not felt in me any but frivolous tastes, but that I would make bold to answer for my readiness to execute all the orders which his Eminence might be pleased to lay upon me, if he should judge me worthy of entering his service. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," said the Cardinal, "and ask for the Abbé Gama, to whom I will give my instructions. You must apply yourself diligently to the study of the French language. It is indispensable." He then inquired after Don Lelio's health, and after kissing his hand, I took my leave. I hastened to the house of Monsieur Gaspar Vivaldi, where I dined amongst a well-chosen party of guests. Monsieur Vivaldi was not married. Literature was his only passion. He loved Latin poetry even better than Italian, and Horace, whom I knew by heart, was his favorite poet. After dinner we repaired to his study, and he handed me 100 Roman crowns, and Don Antonio's present, and assured me that I would be most welcome whenever I would call to take a cup of chocolate with him. After I had taken leave of Don Gaspar, I proceeded towards the Minerva, for I longed to enjoy the surprise of my dear Lucrezia and of her sister. I inquired for Donna Cecilia Monti, their mother, and I saw to my great astonishment a young widow who looked like the sister of her two charming daughters. There was no need for me to give her my name. I had been announced, and she expected me. Her daughters soon came in, and their greeting caused me some amusement, for I did not appear to them to be the same individual. Donna Lucrezia presented me to her youngest sister, only 11 years of age, and to her brother, an abbé of 15, of charming appearance. I took care to behave so as to please the mother. I was modest, respectful, and showed a deep interest in everything I saw. The good advocate arrived, and was surprised at the change in my appearance. He launched out in his usual jokes, and I followed him on that ground, yet I was careful not to give to my conversation the tone of levity which used to cause so much mirth in our travelling coach, so that, to pay me a compliment, he told me that if I had had the sign of manhood shaved from my face, I had certainly transferred it to my mind. Donna Lucrezia did not know what to think of the change in my manners. Towards evening I saw, coming in rapid succession, 5 or 6 ordinary-looking ladies, and as many abbés, who appeared to me some of the volumes with which I was to begin my Roman education. They all listened attentively to the most insignificant word I uttered, and I was very careful to let them enjoy their conjectures about me. Donna Cecilia told the advocate that he was but a poor painter, and that his portraits were not like the originals. He answered that she could not judge, because the original was showing under a mask, and I pretended to be mortified by his answer. Donna Lucrezia said she found me exactly the same, and her sister was of the opinion that the air of Rome gave strangers a peculiar appearance. Everybody applauded, and Angelique turned red with satisfaction. After a visit of 4 hours I bowed myself out, and the advocate following me told me that his mother-in-law begged that I consider myself a friend of the family, and to be certain of a welcome at any hour I liked to call. I thanked him gratefully and took my leave, trusting that I had pleased this amiable society as much as it had pleased me. The next day I presented myself to the Abbé Gama. He was a Portuguese, about 40 years old, handsome, and with a countenance full of candour, wit, and good temper. His affability claimed and obtained confidence. His manners and accent were quite Roman. He informed me, in the blandest manner, that his Eminence had given himself his instructions about me to his majordomo, that I would have a lodging in the Cardinal's palace, that I would have my meals at the secretary's table, and that, until I learned French, I would have nothing to do but make extracts from letters that he would supply me with. He then gave me the address of the French teacher to whom he had already spoken in my behalf. He was a Roman advocate, Dall'Acqua by name, residing precisely opposite the palace. After this short explanation, and an assurance that I could at all times rely upon his friendship, he had me taken to the majordomo, who made me sign my name at the bottom of a page in a large book, already filled with other names, and he counted out 60 Roman crowns, which he paid me for 3 months' salary in advance. After this he accompanied me, followed by a staffiere, to my apartment on the 3rd floor, which I found very comfortably furnished. The servant handed me the key, saying that he would come every morning to attend upon me, and the majordomo accompanied me to the gate to make me known to the gatekeeper. I immediately repaired to my inn, sent my luggage to the palace, and found myself established in a place where great fortune awaited me, if I had only been able to lead a wise and prudent life, but unfortunately it was not in my nature. Volentem ducit, nolentem trahit. I naturally felt it my duty to call upon my mentor, Father Giorgi, to whom I gave all my good news. He said I was on the right road, and that my fortune was in my hands. "Recollect," added the good father, "that to lead a blameless life you must curb your passions, and that whatever misfortune may befall you, it cannot be ascribed by any one to a want of good luck, or attributed to fate. Those words are devoid of sense, and all the fault will rightly fall on your own head. I foresee, reverend father, that my youth and my want of experience will often make it necessary for me to disturb you. I am afraid of proving myself too heavy a charge for you, but you will find me docile and obedient. I suppose you will often think me rather too severe, but you are not likely to confide everything to me." "Everything, without any exception." "Allow me to feel somewhat doubtful. You have not told me where you spent 4 hours yesterday." "Because I did not think it was worth mentioning. I made the acquaintance of those persons during my journey. I believe them to be worthy and respectable, and the right sort of people for me to visit. unless you should be of a different opinion. God forbid! It is a very respectable house, frequented by honest people. They are delighted at having made your acquaintance. You are much liked by everybody, and they hope to retain you as a friend. I have heard all about it this morning, but you must not go there too often, and as a regular guest. Must I cease my visits at once, and without cause? No, it would be a want of politeness on your part. You may go there once or twice every week, but do not be a constant visitor. You are sighing, my son? No, I assure you not. I will obey you. I hope it may not be only a matter of obedience, and I trust your heart will not feel it a hardship, but, if necessary, your heart must be conquered. Recollect that the heart is the greatest enemy of reason. Yet they can be made to agree. We often imagine so, but distrust the animism of your dear Horace. You know that there is no middle course with it. Nisi pare imperat. I know it, but in the family of which we were speaking there is no danger for my heart. I am glad of it, because in that case it will be all the easier for you to abstain from frequent visits. Remember that I shall trust you. And I, Reverend Father, will listen to and follow your good advice. I will visit Donna Cecilia only now and then. Feeling most unhappy, I took his hand to press it against my lips, but he folded me in his arms as a father might have done, and turned himself round so as not to let me see that he was weeping. I dined at the Cardinal's palace, and sat near the Abbé Gama. The table was laid for 12 persons, who all wore the costume of priests. For in Rome everyone is a priest, or wishes to be thought a priest, and as there is no law to forbid anyone to dress like an ecclesiastic, that dress is adopted by all those who wish to be respected, noblemen excepted, even if they are not in the ecclesiastical profession. I felt very miserable, and did not utter a word during the dinner. My silence was construed into a proof of my sagacity. As we rose from the table, the Abbé Gama invited me to spend the day with him, but I declined under pretense of letters to be written, and I truly did so for 7 hours. I wrote to Don Lelio, to Don Antonio, to my young friend Paul, and to the worthy Bishop of Martorano, who answered that he heartily wished himself in my place. Deeply enamoured of Lucrezia and happy in my love, to give her up appeared to me a shameful action. In order to ensure the happiness of my future life, I was beginning to be the executioner of my present felicity, and the tormentor of my heart. I revolted against such a necessity which I judged fictitious, and which I could not admit unless I stood guilty of vileness before the tribunal of my own reason. I thought that Father Giorgi, if he wished to forbid my visiting that family, ought not to have said that it was worthy of respect. My sorrow would not have been so intense. The day and the whole of the night were spent in painful thoughts. In the morning the Abbé Gama brought me a great book filled with ministerial letters from which I was to compile for my amusement. After a short time devoted to that occupation, I went out to take my first French lesson, after which I walked towards the Strada Condotta. I intended to take a long walk, when I heard myself called by my name. I saw the Abbé Gama in front of a coffee-house. I whispered to him that Minerva had forbidden me the coffee-rooms of Rome. Minerva, he answered, desires you to form some idea of such places. Sit down by me. I heard a young abbé telling aloud, but without bitterness, a story which attacked in a most direct manner the justice of his holiness. Everybody was laughing and echoing the story. Another, being asked why he had left the services of Cardinal B., answered that it was because his eminence did not think himself called upon to pay him a part for certain private services, and everybody laughed outright. Another came to the Abbé Gama, and told him that, if he felt any inclination to spend the afternoon at the Villa Medicis, he would find him there with 2 young Roman girls who were satisfied with a quartino, a gold coin worth 1/4 of a sequin. Another abbé read an incendiary sonnet against the government, and several took a copy of it. Another read a satire of his own composition, in which he tore to pieces the honor of a family. In the middle of all that confusion, I saw a priest with a very attractive countenance come in. The size of his hips made me take him for a woman dressed in men's clothes, and I said so to Gama, who told me that he was the celebrated castrato Beppino Delta Mammana. The abbé called him to us, and told him with a laugh that I had taken him for a girl. The impudent fellow looked me full in the face, and said that, if I liked, he would show me whether I had been right or wrong. At the dinner table everyone spoke to me, and I fancied I had given proper answers to all, but, when the repast was over, the Abbé Gama invited me to take coffee in his own apartment. The moment we were alone, he told me that all the guests I had met were worthy and honest men, and he asked me whether I believed that I had succeeded in pleasing the company. I flatter myself I have, I answered. You are wrong, said the abbé. You are flattering yourself. You have so conspicuously avoided the questions put to you that everybody in the room noticed your extreme reserve. In the future no one will ask you any questions. I should be sorry if it should turn out so, but was I to expose my own concerns? No, but there is a medium in all things. Yes, the medium of Horace, but it is often a matter of great difficulty to hit it exactly. A man ought to know how to obtain affection and esteem at the same time. That is the very wish nearest to my heart. Today you have tried for the esteem much more than for the affection of your fellow creatures. It may be a noble aspiration, but you must prepare yourself to fight jealousy and her daughter, calumny. If those two monsters do not succeed in destroying you, the victory must be yours. Now, for instance, you thoroughly refuted Salicetti today. Well, he is a physician, and what is more, a Corsican. He must feel badly towards you. Could I grant that the longings of women during their pregnancy have to influence whatever on the skin of the fetus, when I know the reverse to be the case? Are you not of my opinion? I am for neither party. I have seen many children with some such marks, but I have no means of knowing with certainty whether those marks have their origin in some longing experienced by the mother while she was pregnant. But I can swear it is so. All the better for you if your conviction is based upon such evidence, and all the worse for Salicetti if he denies the possibility of the thing without certain authority. But let him remain in error. It is better thus than to prove him in the wrong and to make a bitter enemy of him. In the evening I called upon Lucrezia. The family knew my success and warmly congratulated me. Lucrezia told me that I looked sad, and I answered that I was assisting at the funeral of my liberty, for I was no longer my own master. Her husband, always fond of a joke, told her that I was in love with her, and his mother-in-law advised him not to show so much intrepidity. I only remained an hour with those charming persons, and then took leave of them. The very air around me was heated by the flame within my breast. When I reached my room I began to write, and spent the night in composing an ode which I sent the next day to the advocate. I was certain that he would shew it to his wife, who loved poetry, and who did not yet know that I was a poet. I abstained from seeing her again for 3 or 4 days. I was learning French and making extracts from ministerial letters. His Eminence was in the habit of receiving every evening, and his rooms were thronged with the highest nobility of Rome. I had never attended these receptions. The Abbé Gama told me that I ought to do so as well as he did, without any pretension. I followed his advice and went. Nobody spoke to me, but as I was unknown, everyone looked at me and inquired who I was. The Abbé Gama asked me which was the lady who appeared to me the most amiable, and I showed one to him, but I regretted having done so, for the courtier went to her, and of course informed her of what I had said. Soon afterwards I saw her look at me through her eyeglass and smile kindly upon me. She was the Marchioness G., whose cicisbeo was Cardinal S. C. On the very day I had fixed to spend the evening with Donna Lucrezia, the worthy advocate called upon me. He told me that if I thought I was going to prove I was not in love with his wife by staying away, I was very much mistaken, and he invited me to accompany all the family to Testaccio, where they intended to have luncheon on the following Thursday. He added that his wife knew my ode by heart, and that she had read it to the intended husband of Angelique, who had a great wish to make my acquaintance. The gentleman was likewise a poet, and would be one of the party to Testaccio. I promised the advocate I would come to his house on the Thursday with a carriage for 2. At that time every Thursday in the month of October was a festival day in Rome. I went to see Donna Cecilia in the evening, and we talked about the excursion the whole time. I felt certain that Donna Lucrezia looked forward to it with as much pleasure as I did myself. We had no fixed plan. We could not have any, but we trusted to the God of love, and tacitly placed our confidence in his protection. I took care that Father Giorgi should not hear of that excursion before I mentioned it to him myself, and I hastened to him in order to obtain his permission to go. I confess that, to obtain his leave, I professed the most complete indifference about it. and the consequence was that the good man insisted upon my going, saying that it was a family party, and that it was quite right for me to visit the environs of Rome, and to enjoy myself in a respectable way. I went to Donna Cecilia's in a carriage which I hired from a certain Roland, a native of Avignon, and if I insist here upon his name, it is because my readers will meet him again in 18 years, his acquaintance with me having had very important results. The charming widow introduced me to Don Francisco, her intended son-in-law, whom she represented as a great friend of literary men, and very deeply learned himself. I accepted it as gospel, and behaved accordingly. Yet I thought he looked rather heavy, and not sufficiently elated for a young man on the point of marrying such a pretty girl as Angelique. But he had plenty of good nature and plenty of money, and these are better than learning and gallantry. As we were ready to get into the carriages, the advocate told me that he would ride with me in my carriage, and that the 3 ladies would go with Don Francisco in the other. I answered at once that he ought to keep Don Francisco company, and that I claimed the privilege of taking care of Donna Cecilia, adding that I should feel dishonoured if things were arranged differently. Thereupon I offered my arm to the handsome widow, who thought the arrangement according to the rules of etiquette and good breeding, and an approving look of my Lucrezia gave me the most agreeable sensation. Yet the proposal of the advocate struck me somewhat unpleasantly, because it was in contradiction with his former behaviour, and especially with what he had said to me in my room a few days before. Has he become jealous? I said to myself. That would have made me almost angry, but the hope of bringing him round during our stay at Testaccio cleared away the dark cloud on my mind, and I was very amiable to Donna Cecilia. What with lunching and walking, we contrived to pass the afternoon very pleasantly. I was very gay, and my love for Lucrezia was not once mentioned. I was all attention to her mother. I occasionally addressed myself to Lucrezia, but not once to the advocate, feeling this the best way to show him that he had insulted me. As we prepared to return, the advocate carried off Donna Cecilia and went with her to the carriage in which were already seated Angelique and Don Francisco. Scarcely able to control my delight, I offered my arm to Donna Lucrezia, paying her some absurd compliment, while the advocate laughed outright, and seemed to enjoy the trick he imagined he had played me. How many things we might have said to each other before giving ourselves up to the material enjoyment of our love, had not the instants been so precious! But, aware that we had only half an hour before us, we were sparing of the minutes. We were absorbed in voluptuous pleasure, when suddenly Lucrezia exclaims, "Oh dear, how unhappy we are!" She pushes me back, composes herself, the carriage stops, and the servant opens the door. "What is the matter?" I inquire. "We are at home." Whenever I recollect the circumstance, it seems to me fabulous, for it is not possible to annihilate time, and the horses were regular old screws. But we were lucky all through. The night was dark, and my beloved angel happened to be on the right side to get out of the carriage first, so that, although the advocate was at the door of the brougham as soon as the footman, everything went right, owing to the slow manner in which Lucrezia alighted. I remained at Donna Cecilia's until midnight. When I got home again, I went to bed. But how could I sleep? I felt burning in me the flame which I had not been able to restore to its original source in the too short distance from Testaccio to Rome. It was consuming me. Oh, unhappy are those who believe that the pleasures of Cythera are worth having, unless they are enjoyed in the most perfect accord by 2 hearts overflowing with love. I only rose in time for my French lesson. My teacher had a pretty daughter named Barbara, who was always present during my lessons, and who sometimes taught me herself with even more exactitude than her father. A good-looking young man, who likewise took lessons, was courting her, and I soon perceived that she loved him. This young man called often upon me, and I liked him, especially on account of his reserve, for, although I made him confess his love for Barbara, he always changed the subject if I mentioned it in our conversation. I had made up my mind to respect his reserve, and not alluded to his affection for several days. But all at once I remarked that he had ceased his visits both to me and to his teacher, and at the same time observed that the young girl was no longer present at my lessons. I felt some curiosity to know what had happened, although it was not, after all, any concern of mine. A few days after, as I was returning from church, I met the young man and reproached him for keeping away from us all. He told me that great sorrow had befallen him, which had fairly turned his brain, and that he was a prey to the most intense despair. His eyes were wet with tears. As I was leaving him, he held me back, and I told him that I would no longer be his friend unless he opened his heart to me. He took me to one of the cloisters, and he spoke thus. I have loved Barbara for the last 6 months, and for 3 months she has given me indisputable proofs of her affection. 5 days ago we were betrayed by the servant, and the father caught us in a rather delicate position. He left the room without saying one word, and I followed him, thinking of throwing myself at his feet. But as I appeared before him, he took hold of me by the arm, pushed me roughly to the door, and forbade me ever to present myself again at his house. I cannot claim her hand in marriage, because one of my brothers is married and my father is not rich. I have no profession, and my mistress has nothing. Alas, now I have confessed all to you, tell me, I entreat you, how she is. I am certain that she is as miserable as I am myself. I cannot manage to get a letter delivered to her, for she does not leave the house, even to attend church. Unhappy wretch, what shall I do? I could but pity him, for, as a man of honor, it was impossible for me to interfere in such a business. I told him that I had not seen Barbara for 5 days, and, not knowing what to say, I gave him the advice which is tendered by all fools under similar circumstances. I advised him to forget his mistress. We had then reached the quay of Ripetta, and, observing that he was casting dark looks towards the Tiber, I feared his despair might lead him to commit some foolish attempt against his own life. And, in order to calm his excited feelings, I promised to make some inquiries from the father about his mistress, and to inform him of all I heard. He felt quieted by my promise, and entreated me not to forget him. In spite of the fire which had been raging through my veins ever since the excursion to Testaccio, I had not seen my Lucrezia for 4 days. I dreaded Father Giorgi's suave manner, and I was still more afraid of finding he had made up his mind to give me no more advice. But, unable to resist my desires, I called upon Lucrezia after my French lesson, and found her alone, sad and dispirited. "Ah," she exclaimed as soon as I was by her side, "I think you might find time to come and see me." "My beloved one, it is not that I cannot find time, but I am so jealous of my love that I would rather die than let it be known publicly. I have been thinking of inviting you all to dine with me at Frascati. I will send you a phaeton, and I trust that some lucky accident will smile upon our love." "Oh yes, do, dearest. I am sure your invitation will be accepted." In a quarter of an hour the rest of the family came in, and I preferred my invitation for the following Sunday, which happened to be the festival of St. Ursula, patroness of Lucrezia's youngest sister. I begged Donna Cecilia to bring her as well as her son. My proposal being readily accepted, I gave notice that the phaeton would be at Donna Cecilia's door at 7 o'clock, and that I would come myself with the carriage for 2 persons. The next day I went to Monsieur Dell'Acqua, and, after my lesson, I saw Barbara, who, passing from one room to another, dropped a paper and earnestly looked at me. I felt bound to pick it up, because a servant who was at hand might have seen it and taken it. It was a letter, enclosing another addressed to her lover. The note for me ran thus: "If you think it to be a sin to deliver the enclosed to your friend, burn it. Have pity on an unfortunate girl, and be discreet." The enclosed letter, which was unsealed, ran as follows: "If you love me as deeply as I love you, you cannot hope to be happy without me. We cannot correspond in any other way than the one I am bold enough to adopt. I am ready to do anything to unite our lives until death. Consider and decide." The cruel situation of the poor girl moved me almost to tears, yet I determined to return her letter the next day, and I enclosed it in a note in which I begged her to excuse me if I could not render her the service she required at my hands. I put it in my pocket ready for delivery. The next day I went for my lesson as usual, but, not seeing Barbara, I had no opportunity of returning her letter, and postponed its delivery to the following day. Unfortunately, just after I had returned to my room, the unhappy lover made his appearance. His eyes were red from weeping, his voice hoarse. He drew such a vivid picture of his misery that, dreading some mad action counselled by despair, I could not withhold from him the consolation which I knew it was in my power to give. This was my first error in this fatal business. I was the victim of my own kindness. The poor fellow read the letter over and over. He kissed it with transports of joy. He wept, hugged me, and thanked me for saving his life. and finally entreated me to take charge of his answer, as his beloved mistress must be longing for consolation as much as he had been himself, assuring me that his letter could not in any way implicate me, and that I was at liberty to read it. And truly, although very long, his letter contained nothing but the assurance of everlasting love, and hopes which could not be realized. Yet I was wrong to accept the character of Mercury to the two young lovers. To refuse, I had only to recollect that Father Giorgi would certainly have disapproved of my easy compliance. The next day I found Monsieur de Lacqua ill in bed. His daughter gave me my lesson in his room, and I thought that perhaps she had obtained her pardon. I contrived to give her her lover's letter, which she dexterously conveyed to her pocket, but her blushes would have easily betrayed her if her father had been looking that way. After the lesson I gave Monsieur de Lacqua notice that I would not come on the morrow, as it was the festival of Saint Ursula, one of the 11,000 princesses and martyr virgins. In the evening, at the reception of his Eminence, which I attended regularly, although persons of distinction seldom spoke to me, the Cardinal beckoned to me. He was speaking to the beautiful Marchioness G., to whom Gama had indiscreetly confided that I thought her the handsomest woman amongst his Eminence's guests. "Her Grace," said the Cardinal, "wishes to know whether you are making rapid progress in the French language, which she speaks admirably." I answered in Italian that I had learned a great deal, but that I was not yet bold enough to speak. "You should be bold," said the Marchioness, "but without showing any pretension. It is the best way to disarm criticism." My mind having almost unwittingly lent to the words "you should be bold," a meaning which had very likely been far from the idea of the Marchioness, I turned very red, and the handsome speaker, observing it, changed the conversation and dismissed me. The next morning at 7 o'clock I was at Donna Cecilia's door. The phaeton was there, as well as the carriage for 2 persons, which this time was an elegant vis-à-vis, so light and well hung that Donna Cecilia praised it highly when she took her seat. "I shall have my turn as we return to Rome," said Lucrezia, and I bowed to her as if in acceptance of her promise. Lucrezia thus set suspicion at defiance in order to prevent suspicion arising. My happiness was assured, and I gave way to my natural flow of spirits. I ordered a splendid dinner, and we all set out towards the Villa Ludovisi. As we might have missed each other during our ramblings, we agreed to meet again at the inn at 1 o'clock. The discreet widow took the arm of her son-in-law, Angelique remained with her sister, and Lucrezia was my delightful share. Ursula and her brother were running about together, and in less than a quarter of an hour I had Lucrezia entirely to myself. "Did you remark," she said, "with what candour I secured for us 2 hours of delightful tête-à-tête, and a tête-à-tête in a vis-à-vis too? How clever love is!" "Yes, darling, love has made but one of our 2 souls. I adore you, and if I have the courage to pass so many days without seeing you, it is in order to be rewarded by the freedom of one single day like this. I did not think it possible, but you have managed it all very well. You know too much for your age, dearest. A month ago, my beloved, I was but an ignorant child, and you are the first woman who has initiated me into the mysteries of love. Your departure will kill me, for I could not find another woman like you in all Italy." "What? I am your first love? Alas, you will never be cured of it. Oh, why am I not entirely your own? You are also the first true love of my heart, and you will be the last. How great will be the happiness of my successor! I should not be jealous of her, but what suffering would be mine if I thought that her heart was not like mine." Lucrezia, seeing my eyes wet with tears, began to give way to her own, and, seating ourselves on the grass, our lips drank our tears amidst the sweetest kisses. How sweet is the nectar of the tears shed by love, when that nectar is relished amidst the raptures of mutual ardour! I have often tasted them, those delicious tears, and I can say, knowingly, that the ancient physicians were right, and that the modern are wrong. In a moment of calm, seeing the disorder in which we both were, I told her that we might be surprised. "Do not fear, my best beloved," she said. "We are under the guardianship of our good angels." We were resting and reviving our strength by gazing into one another's eyes, when suddenly Lucrezia, casting a glance to the right, exclaimed, "Look there, idol of my heart! Have I not told you so? Yes, the angels are watching over us. Ah, how he stares at us! He seems to try to give us confidence. Look at that little demon. Admire him. He must certainly be your guardian spirit, or mine.
I thought she was delirious. "What are you saying, dearest? I do not understand you. What am I to admire?" "Do you not see that beautiful serpent with the blazing skin, which lifts its head and seems to worship us?" I looked in the direction she indicated, and saw a serpent with changeable colors about 3 feet in length, which did seem to be looking at us. I was not particularly pleased at the sight, but I could not show myself less courageous than she was. "What?" I said. "Are you not afraid?" "I tell you again that the sight is delightful to me, and I feel certain that it is a spirit with nothing but the shape, or rather the appearance, of a serpent. And if the spirit came gliding along the grass and hissed at you, I would hold you tighter against my bosom and set him at defiance. In your arms Lucrezia is safe. Look, the spirit is going away. Quick, quick. He is warning us of the approach of some profane person, and tells us to seek some other retreat to renew our pleasures. Let us go." We rose and slowly advanced towards Donna Cecilia and the advocate, who were just emerging from a neighboring alley. Without avoiding them, and without hurrying, just as if to meet one another was a very natural occurrence, I inquired of Donna Cecilia whether her daughter had any fear of serpents. In spite of all her strength of mind, she answered, she is dreadfully afraid of thunder, and she will scream with terror at the sight of the smallest snake. There are some here, but she need not be frightened, for they are not venomous. I was speechless with astonishment, for I discovered that I had just witnessed a wonderful love miracle. At that moment the children came up, and, without ceremony, we again parted company. "Tell me, wonderful being, bewitching woman, what would you have done if, instead of your pretty serpent, you had seen your husband and your mother?" "Nothing. Do you not know that, in moments of such rapture, lovers see and feel nothing but love? Do you doubt having possessed me wholly, entirely?" Lucrezia, in speaking thus, was not composing a poetical ode. She was not feigning fictitious sentiments. Her looks, the sound of her voice, were truth itself. "Are you certain," I inquired, "that we are not suspected? My husband does not believe us to be in love with each other, or else he does not mind such trifling pleasures as youth is generally wont to indulge in. My mother is a clever woman, and perhaps she suspects the truth, but she is aware that it is no longer any concern of hers. As to my sister, she must know everything, for she cannot have forgotten the broken-down bed. But she is prudent, and besides, she has taken it into her head to pity me. She has no conception of the nature of my feelings towards you. If I had not met you, my beloved, I should probably have gone through life without realizing such feelings myself. For what I feel for my husband, well, I have for him the obedience which my position as a wife imposes upon me. And yet he is most happy, and I envy him. He can clasp in his arms all your lovely person whenever he likes. There is no hateful veil to hide any of your charms from his gaze. Oh, where art thou, my dear serpent? Come to us, come and protect us against the surprise of the uninitiated. And this very instant I fulfill all the wishes of him I adore." We passed the morning in repeating that we loved each other, and in exchanging over and over again substantial proofs of our mutual passion. We had a delicious dinner, during which I was all attention for the amiable Donna Cecilia. My pretty tortoise-shell box, filled with excellent snuff, went more than once round the table. As it happened to be in the hands of Lucrezia, who was sitting on my left, her husband told her that, if I had no objection, she might give me her ring and keep the snuff-box in exchange. Thinking that the ring was not of as much value as the box, I immediately accepted, but I found the ring of greater value. Lucrezia would not, however, listen to anything on that subject. She put the box in her pocket, and thus compelled me to keep her ring. Dessert was nearly over, the conversation was very animated, when suddenly the intended husband of Angelique claimed our attention for the reading of a sonnet which he had composed and dedicated to me. I thanked him, and placing the sonnet in my pocket, promised to write one for him. This was not, however, what he wished. He expected that, stimulated by emulation, I would call for paper and pen, and sacrifice to Apollo hours, which it was much more to my taste to employ in worshipping another god, whom his cold nature knew only by name. We drank coffee, I paid the bill, and we went about rambling through the labyrinthine alleys of the Villa Aldobrandini. What sweet recollections that villa has left in my memory! It seemed as if I saw my divine Lucrezia for the first time. Our looks were full of ardent love, our hearts were beating in concert with the most tender impatience, and a natural instinct was leading us towards a solitary asylum, which the hand of love seemed to have prepared on purpose for the mysteries of its secret worship. There, in the middle of a long avenue, and under a canopy of thick foliage, we found a wide sofa made of grass, and sheltered by a deep thicket. From that place our eyes could range over an immense plain, and view the avenue to such a distance right and left that we were perfectly secure against any surprise. We did not require to exchange one word at the sight of this beautiful temple so favourable to our love. Our hearts spoke the same language. Without a word being spoken, our ready hands soon managed to get rid of all obstacles, and to expose in a state of nature all the beauties which are generally veiled by troublesome wearing apparel. 2 whole hours were devoted to the most delightful loving ecstasies. At last we exclaimed together in mutual ecstasy, "O love, we thank thee!" We slowly retraced our steps towards the carriages, revelling in our intense happiness. Lucrezia informed me that Angelique's suitor was wealthy, that he owned a splendid villa at Tivoli, and that most likely he would invite us all to dine and pass the night there. "I pray the God of love," she added, "to grant us a night as beautiful as this day has been." Then, looking sad, she said, "But alas, the ecclesiastical lawsuit which has brought my husband to Rome is progressing so favourably that I am mortally afraid he will obtain judgment all too soon." The journey back to the city lasted 2 hours. We were alone in my vis-à-vis, and we overtaxed nature, exacting more than it can possibly give. As we were getting near Rome, we were compelled to let the curtain fall before the dénouement of the drama, which we had performed to the complete satisfaction of the actors. I returned home rather fatigued, but the sound sleep which was so natural at my age restored my full vigour, and in the morning I took my French lesson at the usual hour. End of chapter 9.
Chapter 10, Part 1 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 2, Cleric in Naples. Chapter 10, Part 1. Monsieur Delacroix being very ill, his daughter Barbara gave me my lesson. When it was over, she seized an opportunity of slipping a letter into my pocket, and immediately disappeared, so that I had no chance of refusing. The letter was addressed to me, and expressed feelings of the warmest gratitude. She only desired me to inform her lover that her father had spoken to her again, and that most likely he would engage a new servant as soon as he had recovered from his illness, and she concluded her letter by assuring me that she never would implicate me in this business. Her father was compelled to keep his bed for a fortnight, and Barbara continued to give me my lesson every day. I felt for her an interest which, from me towards a young and pretty girl, was, indeed, quite a new sentiment. It was a feeling of pity, and I was proud of being able to help and comfort her. Her eyes never rested upon mine, her hand never met mine, I never saw in her toilette the slightest wish to please me. She was very pretty, and I knew she had a tender, loving nature, but nothing interfered with the respect and the regard which I was bound in honour and in good faith to feel towards her, and I was proud to remark that she never thought me capable of taking advantage of her weakness or of her position. When the father had recovered, he dismissed his servant and engaged another. Barbara entreated me to inform her friend of the circumstance, and likewise of her hope to gain the new servant to their interests, at least sufficiently to secure the possibility of carrying on some correspondence. I promised to do so, and as a mark of her gratitude she took my hand to carry it to her lips, but quickly withdrawing it, I tried to kiss her. She turned her face away, blushing deeply. I was much pleased with her modesty. Barbara having succeeded in gaining the new servant over, I had nothing more to do with the intrigue, and I was very glad of it, for I knew my interference might have brought evil on my own head. Unfortunately, it was already too late. I seldom visited Don Gaspar. The study of the French language took up all my mornings, and it was only in the morning that I could see him. But I called every evening upon Father Georgi, and, although I went to him only as one of his protégés, it gave me some reputation. I seldom spoke before his guests, yet I never felt weary, for in his circle his friends would criticize without slandering, discuss politics without stubbornness, and literature without passion, and I profited by all. After my visit to the sagacious monk, I used to attend the assembly of the cardinal, my master, as a matter of duty. Almost every evening, when she happened to see me at her card table, the beautiful marchioness would address to me a few gracious words in French, and I always answered in Italian, not caring to make her laugh before so many persons. My feelings for her were of a singular kind. I must leave them to the analysis of the reader. I thought that woman charming, yet I avoided her. It was not because I was afraid of falling in love with her. I loved Lucrezia, and I firmly believed that such an affection was a shield against any other attachment. But it was because I feared that she might love me, or have a passing fancy for me. Was it self-conceit or modesty, vice or virtue? Perhaps neither one nor the other. One evening she desired the Abbé Gama to call me to her. She was standing near the cardinal, my patron, and the moment I approached her she caused me a strange feeling of surprise by asking me in Italian a question which I was far from anticipating. "How do you like Frascati?" "Very much, madam. I have never seen such a beautiful place." "But your company was still more beautiful, and your vis-a-vis was very smart." I only bowed low to the Marchioness, and a moment after Cardinal Acquaviva said to me kindly, "You are astonished at your adventure being known." "No, my lord, but I am surprised that people should talk of it. I could not have believed Rome to be so much like a small village." "The longer you live in Rome," said his Eminence, "the more you will find it so. Have you not yet presented yourself to kiss the foot of our Holy Father?" "Not yet, my lord." "Then you must do so." I bowed in compliance to his wishes. The Abbé Gama told me to present myself to the Pope on the morrow, and he added, "Of course you have already shown yourself in the Marchioness G's palace." "No, I have never been there." "You astonish me, but she often speaks to you." "I have no objection to go with you." "I never visit at her palace." "Yet she speaks to you likewise." "Yes, but—" "You do not know Rome. Go alone, believe me, you ought to go." "Will she receive me?" "You are joking, I suppose. Of course it is out of the question for you to be announced. You will call when the doors are wide open to everybody. You will meet there all those who pay homage to her." "Will she see me?" "No doubt of it." On the following day I proceeded to Monte Cavallo, and I was at once led into the room where the Pope was alone. I threw myself on my knees and kissed the holy cross on his most holy slipper. The Pope enquiring who I was, I told him, and he answered that he knew me, congratulating me upon my being in the service of so eminent a cardinal. He asked me how I had succeeded in gaining the cardinal's favour. I answered with a faithful recital of my adventures from my arrival at Martorano. He laughed heartily at all I said respecting the poor and worthy bishop, and remarked that, instead of trying to address him in Tuscan, I could speak in the Venetian dialect, as he was himself speaking to me in the dialect of Bologna. I felt quite at my ease with him, and I told him so much news and amused him so well, that the Holy Father kindly said that he would be glad to see me whenever I presented myself at Monte Cavallo. I begged his permission to read all forbidden books, and he granted it with his blessing, saying that I should have the permission in writing, but he forgot it. Benedict XIV was a learned man, very amiable, and fond of a joke. I saw him for the second time at the Via Medicis. He called me to him, and continued his walk, speaking of trifling things. He was then accompanied by Cardinal Albani and the ambassador from Venice. A man of modest appearance approached his Holiness, who asked what he required. The man said a few words in a low voice, and, after listening to him, the Pope answered, "You are right, place your trust in God," and he gave him his blessing. The poor fellow went away very dejected, and the Holy Father continued his walk. "This man," I said, "most Holy Father, has not been pleased with the answer of your Holiness." "Why?" "Because most likely he had already addressed himself to God before he ventured to apply to you, and when your Holiness sends him to God again, he finds himself sent back, as the proverb says, from Herod to Pilate." The Pope, as well as his two companions, laughed heartily, but I kept a serious countenance. "I cannot," continued the Pope, "do any good without God's assistance." "Very true, Holy Father, but the man is aware that you are God's prime minister, and it is easy to imagine his trouble now that the minister sends him again to the master. His only resource is to give money to the beggars of Rome, who for one bajocco will pray for him." They boast of their influence before the throne of the Almighty, but as I have faith only in your credit, I entreat your holiness to deliver me of the heat which inflames my eyes by granting me permission to eat meat. Eat meat, my son. Holy Father, give me your blessing. He blessed me, adding that I was not dispensed from fasting. That very evening, at the cardinal's assembly, I found that the news of my dialogue with the Pope was already known. Everybody was anxious to speak to me. I felt flattered, but I was much more delighted at the joy which Cardinal Acquaviva tried in vain to conceal. As I wished not to neglect Gama's advice, I presented myself to mention of the beautiful Marchioness at the hour at which everyone had free access to her ladyship. I saw her. I saw the cardinal and a great many abbés, but I might have supposed myself invisible, for no one honoured me with a look, and no one spoke to me. I left after having performed for half an hour the character of a mute. 5 or 6 days afterwards, the Marchioness told me graciously that she had caught a sight of me in her reception rooms. I was there, it is true, madam, but I had no idea that I had the honour to be seen by your ladyship. Oh, I see everybody. They tell me that you have wit. If it is not a mistake on the part of your informants, your ladyship gives me very good news. Oh, they are excellent judges. Then, madam, those persons must have honoured me with their conversation, otherwise it is not likely that they would have been able to express such an opinion. No doubt, but let me see you often at my receptions. Our conversation had been overheard by those who were around. His Excellency the Cardinal told me that, when the Marchioness addressed herself particularly to me in French, my duty was to answer her in the same language, good or bad. The cunning politician Gama took me apart, and remarked that my repartees were too smart, too cutting, and that, after a time, I would be sure to displease. I had made considerable progress in French. I had given up my lessons, and practice was all I required. I was then in the habit of calling sometimes upon Lucrezia in the morning, and of visiting in the evening Father Georgi, who was acquainted with the excursion to Frascati, and had not expressed any dissatisfaction. 2 days after the sort of command laid upon me by the Marchioness, I presented myself at her reception. As soon as she saw me, she favoured me with a smile, which I acknowledged by a deep reverence. That was all. In a quarter of an hour afterwards I left the mansion. The Marchioness was beautiful, but she was powerful, and I could not make up my mind to crawl at the feet of power, and, on that head, I felt disgusted with the manners of the Romans. One morning, towards the end of November, the advocate, accompanied by Angelique's intendant, called on me. The latter gave me a pressing invitation to spend 24 hours at Tivoli with the friends I had entertained at Frascati. I accepted with great pleasure, for I had found no opportunity of being alone with Lucrezia since the festival of St. Ursula. I promised to be at Donna Cecilia's house at daybreak with the same vis-à-vis. It was necessary to start very early, because Tivoli is 16 miles from Rome, and has so many objects of interest that it requires many hours to see them all. As I had to sleep out that night, I craved permission to do so from the cardinal himself, who, hearing with whom I was going, told me that I was quite right not to lose such an opportunity of visiting that splendid place in such good society. The first dawn of day found me with my vis-à-vis and 4 at the door of Donna Cecilia, who came with me as before. The charming widow, notwithstanding her strict morality, was delighted at my love for her daughter. The family rode in a large phaeton hired by Don Francisco, which gave room for 6 persons. At 7:30 in the morning we made a halt at a small place where had been prepared, by Don Francisco's orders, an excellent breakfast, which was intended to replace the dinner, and we all made a hearty meal, as we were not likely to find time for anything but supper at Tivoli. I wore on my finger the beautiful ring which Lucrezia had given me. At the back of the ring I had had a piece of enamel placed. On it was delineated a saduceus, with 1 serpent between the letters Alpha and Omega. This ring was the subject of conversation during breakfast, and Don Francisco, as well as the advocate, exerted himself in vain to guess the meaning of the hieroglyphs, much to the amusement of Lucrezia, who understood the mysterious secret so well. We continued our road, and reached Tivoli at 10 o'clock. We began by visiting Don Francisco's villa. It was a beautiful little house, and we spent the following 6 hours in examining together the antiquities of Tivoli. Lucrezia, having occasion to whisper a few words to Don Francisco, I seized the opportunity of telling Angelique that after her marriage I should be happy to spend a few days of the fine season with her. "Sir," she answered, I give you fair notice that the moment I become mistress in this house, you will be the very first person to be excluded." "I feel greatly obliged to you, Signora, for your timely notice." But the most amusing part of the affair was, that I construed Angelique's wanton insult into a declaration of love. I was astounded. Lucrezia, remarking the state I was in, touched my arm, enquiring what ailed me. I told her, and she said at once, "My darling, my happiness cannot last long. The cruel moment of our separation is drawing near. When I have gone, pray undertake the task of compelling her to acknowledge her error. Angelique pities me. Be sure to avenge me." I have forgotten to mention that at Don Francisco's villa I happened to praise a very pretty room opening upon the orange house, and the amiable host, having heard me, came obligingly to me, and said that it should be my room that night. Lucrezia feigned not to hear, but it was to her Ariadne's clue, for, as we were to remain altogether during our visit to the beauties of Tivoli, we had no chance of a tete-a-tete through the day. I have said that we devoted 6 hours to an examination of the antiquities of Tivoli, but I am bound to confess here that I saw, for my part, very little of them, and it was only 28 years later that I made a thorough acquaintance with the beautiful spot. We returned to the villa towards evening, fatigued and very hungry, but an hour's rest before supper, a repast which lasted 2 hours, the most delicious dishes, the most exquisite wines, and particularly the excellent wine of Tivoli, restored us so well that everybody wanted nothing more than a good bed, and the freedom to enjoy the bed according to his own taste. As everybody objected to sleep alone, Lucrezia said that she would sleep with Angelique in one of the rooms leading to the orange house, and proposed that her husband should share a room with the young abbé, his brother-in-law, and that Donna Cecilia should take her youngest daughter with her. The arrangement met with general approbation, and Don Francisco, taking a candle, escorted me to my pretty little room adjoining the one in which the 2 sisters were to sleep, and, after showing me how I could lock myself in, he wished me good night and left me alone. Angelique had no idea that I was her near neighbour, but Lucrezia and I, without exchanging a single word on the subject, had perfectly understood each other. I watched through the keyhole, and saw the 2 sisters come into their room, preceded by the polite Don Francisco, who carried a taper, and, after lighting a night lamp, bade them good night and retired. Then my 2 beauties, their door once locked, sat down on the sofa and completed their night toilette, which, in that fortunate climate, is similar to the costume of our first mother. Lucrezia, knowing that I was waiting to come in, told her sister to lie down on the side towards the window, and the Virgin, having no idea that she was exposing her most secret beauties to my profane eyes, crossed the room in a state of complete nakedness. Lucrezia put out the lamp and lay down near her innocent sister. Happy moments, which I can no longer enjoy, but the sweet remembrance of which death alone can make me lose. I believe I never undressed myself as quickly as I did that evening. I open the door and fall into the arms of my Lucrezia, who says to her sister, "It is my angel, my love, never mind him, and go to sleep." What a delightful picture I could offer to my readers, if it were possible for me to paint voluptuousness in its most enchanting colours! What ecstasies of love from the very onset! What delicious raptures succeeded each other until the sweetest fatigue made us give way to the soothing influence of Morpheus. The first rays of the sun, piercing through the crevices of the shutters, wake us out of our refreshing slumbers, and like 2 valorous knights who have ceased fighting only to renew the contest with increased ardour, we lose no time in giving ourselves up to all the intensity of the flame which consumes us. Oh, my beloved Lucrezia, how supremely happy I am! But, my darling, mind your sister, she might turn round and see us. Fear nothing, my life. My sister is kind, she loves me, she pities me. Do you not love me, my dear Angelique? Oh, turn round, see how happy your sister is, and know what felicity awaits you when you own the sway of love. Angelique, a young maiden of 17 summers, must have suffered the torments of Tantalus during the night, and who only wishes for a pretext to show that she has forgiven her sister, turns round, and covering her sister with kisses, confesses that she has not closed her eyes through the night. Then forgive likewise, darling Angelique, forgive him who loves me, and whom I adore, says Lucrezia. Unfathomable power of the god who conquers all human beings! Angelique hates me, I say. I dare not. No, I do not hate you, answers the charming girl. Kiss her, dearest, says Lucrezia, pushing me towards her sister, and pleased to see her in my arms, motionless and languid. But sentiment, still more than love, forbids me to deprive Lucrezia of the proof of my gratitude, and I turn to her with all the rapture of a beginner, feeling that my ardour is increased by Angelique's ecstasy, as for the first time she witnesses the amorous contest. Lucrezia, dying of enjoyment, entreats me to stop, but, as I do not listen to her prayer, she tricks me, and the sweet Angelique makes her first sacrifice to the mother of love. It is thus very likely that when the gods inhabited this earth, the voluptuous Arcadia, in love with the soft and pleasing breath of Zephyrus, one day opened her arms and was fecundated. Lucrezia was astonished and delighted, and covered us both with kisses. Angelique, as happy as her sister, expired deliciously in my arms for the third time, and she seconded me with so much loving ardour, that it seemed to me I was tasting happiness for the first time. Phoebus had left the nuptial couch, and his rays were already diffusing light over the universe, and that light, reaching us through the closed shutters, gave me warning to quit the place. We exchanged the most loving adieus. I left my two divinities and retired to my own room. A few minutes afterwards the cheerful voice of the advocate was heard in the chamber of the sisters. He was reproaching them for sleeping too long. Then he knocked at my door, threatening to bring the ladies to me, and went away, saying that he would send me the hairdresser. After many ablutions and a careful toilette, I thought I could show my face, and I presented myself coolly in the drawing-room. The two sisters were there with the other members of our society, and I was delighted with their rosy cheeks. Lucrezia was frank and gay, and beamed with happiness. Angelique, as fresh as the morning dew, was more radiant than usual, but fidgety, and carefully avoided looking me in the face. I saw that my useless attempts to catch her eyes made her smile, and I remarked to her mother, rather mischievously, that it was a pity Angelique used paint for her face. She was duped by this stratagem, and compelled me to pass a handkerchief over her face, and was then obliged to look at me. I offered her my apologies, and Don Francisco appeared highly pleased that the complexion of his intended had met with such triumph. After breakfast we took a walk through the garden, and, finding myself alone with Lucrezia, I expostulated tenderly with her for having almost thrown her sister in my arms. "Do not reproach me," she said, "when I deserve praise. I have brought light into the darkness of my charming sister's soul. I have initiated her in the sweetest of mysteries, and now, instead of pitying me, she must envy me. Far from having hatred for you, she must love you dearly, and as I am so unhappy as to have to part from you very soon, my beloved, I leave her to you. She will replace me. Ah, Lucrezia, how can I love her? Is she not a charming girl? No doubt of it, but my adoration for you is a shield against any other love. Besides, Don Francisco must, of course, entirely monopolize her, and I do not wish to cause coolness between them, or to ruin the peace of their home. I am certain your sister is not like you, and I would bet that, even now, she upbraids herself for having given way to the ardour of her temperament. Most likely. But, dearest, I am sorry to say my husband expects to obtain judgment in the course of this week, and then the short instants of happiness will forever be lost to me." This was sad news indeed, and to cause a diversion at the breakfast table, I took much notice of the generous Don Francisco, and promised to compose a nuptial song for his wedding day, which had been fixed for the early part of January. We returned to Rome, and for the 3 hours that she was with me in my vis-a-vis, Lucrezia had no reason to think that my ardour was at all abated. But when we reached the city, I was rather fatigued, and proceeded at once to the palace. Lucrezia had guessed rightly. Her husband obtained his judgment 3 or 4 days afterwards, and called upon me to announce their departure for the day after the morrow. He expressed his warm friendship for me, and by his invitation I spent the 2 last evenings with Lucrezia. But we were always surrounded by the family. The day of her departure, wishing to cause her an agreeable surprise, I left Rome before them, and waited for them at the place where I thought they would put up for the night. But the advocate, having been detained by several engagements, was detained in Rome, and they only reached the place next day for dinner. We dined together, we exchanged a sad, painful farewell, and they continued their journey while I returned to Rome. After the departure of this charming woman, I found myself in a sort of solitude very natural to a young man whose heart is not full of hope. I passed whole days in my room, making extracts from the French letters written by the cardinal, and his eminence was kind enough to tell me that my extracts were judiciously made, but that he insisted upon my not working so hard. The beautiful Marchioness was present when he paid me that compliment. Since my second visit to her, I had not presented myself at her house. She was consequently rather cool to me, and, glad of an opportunity of making me feel her displeasure, she remarked to his eminence that very likely work was a consolation to me in the great void caused by the departure of Donna Lucrezia. I candidly confess, madam, that I felt her loss deeply. She was kind and generous. Above all, she was indulgent when I did not call often upon her. My friendship for her was innocent. I have no doubt of it, although your ode was the work of a poet deeply in love. Oh, said the kindly cardinal, a poet cannot possibly write without professing to be in love. But, replied the Marchioness, if the poet is really in love, he has no need of professing a feeling which he possesses. As she was speaking, the Marchioness drew out of her pocket a paper which she offered to his eminence. This is the ode, she said. It does great honour to the poet, for it is admitted to be a masterpiece by all the literati in Rome, and Donna Lucrezia knows it by heart. The cardinal read it over, and returned it, smiling, and remarking that, as he had no taste for Italian poetry, she must give herself the pleasure of translating it into French rhyme if she wished him to admire it. I only write French prose, answered the Marchioness, and the prose translation destroys half the beauty of poetry. I am satisfied with writing occasionally a little Italian poetry without any pretension to poetical fame. Those words were accompanied by a very significant glance in my direction. I should consider myself fortunate, madam, if I could obtain the happiness of admiring some of your poetry. Here is a sonnet of her ladyship's, said Cardinal S.C. I took it respectfully, and I prepared to read it, but the amiable Marchioness told me to put it in my pocket and return it to the cardinal the next day, although she did not think the sonnet worth so much trouble. If you should happen to go out in the morning, said Cardinal S.C., you could bring it back and dine with me. Cardinal Acquaviva immediately answered for me. He will be sure to go out purposely. End of Chapter 10, Part 1. Chapter 10, Part 2 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 2, Cleric in Naples. Chapter 10, Part 2. With a deep reverence, which expressed my thanks, I left the room quietly and returned to my apartment, very impatient to read the sonnet. Yet, before satisfying my wish, I could not help making some reflections on the situation. I began to think myself somebody since the gigantic stride I had made this evening at the cardinal's assembly. The Marchioness de G had shown in the most open way the interest she felt in me, and, under cover of her grandeur, had not hesitated to compromise herself publicly by the most flattering advances. But who would have thought of disapproving? A young abbé like me, without any importance whatever, who could scarcely pretend to her high protection. True, but she was precisely the woman to grant it to those who, feeling themselves unworthy of it, dared not show any pretensions to her patronage. On that head my modesty must be evident to everyone, and the Marchioness would certainly have insulted me had she supposed me capable of sufficient vanity to fancy that she felt the slightest inclination for me. No, such a piece of self-conceit was not in accordance with my nature. Her cardinal himself had invited me to dinner. Would he have done so if he had admitted the possibility of the beautiful Marchioness feeling anything for me? Of course not, and he gave me an invitation to dine with him only because he had understood from the very words of the lady that I was just the sort of person with whom they could converse for a few hours without any risk. To be sure, without any risk whatever. Oh, Master Casanova, do you really think so? Well, why should I put on a mask before my readers? They may think me conceited if they please, but the fact of the matter is that I felt sure of having made a conquest of the Marchioness. I congratulated myself because she had taken the first, most difficult, and most important step. Had she not done so, I should never have dared to lay siege to her, even in the most approved fashion. I should never have even ventured to dream of winning her. It was only this evening that I thought she might replace Lucrezia. She was beautiful, young, full of wit and talent. She was fond of literary pursuits, and very powerful in Rome. What more was necessary? Yet I thought it would be good policy to appear ignorant of her inclination for me, and to let her suppose from the very next day that I was in love with her, but that my love appeared to me hopeless. I knew that such a plan was infallible, because it saved her dignity. It seemed to me that Father Georgi himself would be compelled to approve such an undertaking, and I had remarked with great satisfaction that Cardinal Acquaviva had expressed his delight at Cardinal S.C.'s invitation, an honour which he had never yet bestowed on me himself. This affair might have very important results for me. I read the Marchioness's sonnet, and found it easy, flowing, and well written. It was composed in praise of the King of Prussia, who had just conquered Silesia by a masterly stroke. As I was copying it, the idea struck me to personify Silesia, and to make her, in answer to the sonnet, bewail that love, supposed to be the author of the sonnet of the Marchioness, could applaud the man who had conquered her, when that conqueror was the sworn enemy of love. It is impossible for a man accustomed to write poetry to abstain when a happy subject smiles upon his delighted imagination. If he attempted to smother the poetical flame running through his veins, it would consume him. I composed my sonnet, keeping the same rhymes as in the original, and, well pleased with my muse, I went to bed. The next morning the Abbé Gama came in, just as I had finished recopying my sonnet, and said he would breakfast with me. He complimented me upon the honour conferred on me by the invitation of Cardinal S.C. "But be prudent," he added, "for his Eminence has the reputation of being jealous." I thanked him for his friendly advice, taking care to assure him that I had nothing to fear, because I did not feel the slightest inclination for the handsome Marchioness. Cardinal S.C. received me with great kindness mingled with dignity, to make me realize the importance of the favour he was bestowing upon me. "What do you think," he inquired, "of the sonnet?" "Monseigneur, it is perfectly written, and, what is more, it is a charming composition. Allow me to return it to you with my thanks." "She has much talent. I wish to show you 10 stanzas of her composition, my dear Abbé, but you must promise to be very discreet about it." "Your Eminence may rely on me." He opened his bureau, and brought forth the stanzas of which he was the subject. I read them, found them well written, but devoid of enthusiasm. They were the work of a poet, and expressed love in the words of passion, but were not pervaded by that peculiar feeling by which true love is so easily discovered. The worthy cardinal was doubtless guilty of a very great indiscretion, but self-love is the cause of so many injudicious steps. I asked his Eminence whether he had answered the stanzas. "No," he replied, "I have not. But would you feel disposed to lend me your poetical pen, always under the seal of secrecy?" "As to secrecy, Monseigneur, I promise it faithfully, but I am afraid the Marchioness will remark the difference between your style and mine." "She has nothing of my composition," said the cardinal. "I do not think she supposes me a fine poet, and for that reason your stanzas must be written in such a manner that she will not esteem them above my abilities." "I will write them with pleasure, Monseigneur, and your Eminence can form an opinion. If they do not seem good enough to be worthy of you, they need not be given to the Marchioness." "That is well said. Will you write them at once?" "What, now, Monseigneur? It is not like prose." "Well, well, try to let me have them tomorrow." We dined alone, and his Eminence complimented me upon my excellent appetite, which he remarked was as good as his own. But I was beginning to understand my eccentric host, and, to flatter him, I answered that he praised me more than I deserved, and that my appetite was inferior to his. This singular compliment delighted him, and I saw all the use I could make of his Eminence. Towards the end of the dinner, as we were conversing, the Marchioness made her appearance, and, as a matter of course, without being announced. Her looks threw me into raptures. I thought her a perfect beauty. She did not give the cardinal time to meet her, but sat down near him, while I remained standing, according to etiquette. Without appearing to notice me, the Marchioness ran wittily over various topics until coffee was brought in. Then, addressing herself to me, she told me to sit down, just as if she was bestowing charity upon me. "By the by, Abbé," she said, a minute after, "have you read my sonnet?" "Yes, madam, and I have had the honour to return it to his Eminence. I have found it so perfect that I am certain it must have cost you a great deal of time." "Time!" exclaimed the cardinal. "Oh, you do not know the Marchioness." "Monseigneur," I replied, "nothing can be done well without time, and that is why I have not dared to show to your eminence an answer to the sonnet which I have written in half an hour." "Let us see it, Abbé," said the Marchioness. "I want to read it." Answer of Silesia to Love. This title brought the most fascinating blushes on her countenance. "But love is not mentioned in the sonnet," exclaimed the cardinal. "Wait," said the Marchioness, "we must respect the idea of the poet." She read the sonnet over and over, and thought that the reproaches addressed by Silesia to Love were very just. She explained my idea to the cardinal, making him understand why Silesia was offended at having been conquered by the King of Prussia. "Ah, I see, exclaimed the cardinal, full of joy. "Silesia is a woman, and the King of Prussia— Oh, that's really a fine idea." And the good cardinal laughed heartily for more than a quarter of an hour. "I must copy that sonnet," he added. "Indeed, I must have it." "The abbé," said the obliging Marchioness, "will save you the trouble. I will dictate it to him." I prepared to write, but his eminence suddenly exclaimed, "My dear Marchioness, this is wonderful. He has kept the same rhymes as in your own sonnet. Did you observe it?" The beautiful Marchioness gave me then a look of such expression that she completed her conquest. I understood that she wanted me to know the cardinal as well as she knew him. It was a kind of partnership in which I was quite ready to play my part. As soon as I had written the sonnet under the charming woman's dictation, I took my leave, but not before the cardinal had told me that he expected me to dinner the next day. I had plenty of work before me, for the 10 stanzas I had to compose were of the most singular character, and I lost no time in shutting myself up in my room to think of them. I had to keep my balance between 2 points of equal difficulty, and I felt that great care was indispensable. I had to place the Marchioness in such a position that she could pretend to believe the cardinal the author of the stanzas, and at the same time compel her to find out that I had written them, and that I was aware of her knowing it. It was necessary to speak so carefully that not one expression should breathe even the faintest hope on my part, and yet to make my stanzas blaze with the ardent fire of my love under the thin veil of poetry. As for the cardinal, I knew well enough that the better the stanzas were written, the more disposed he would be to sign them. All I wanted was clearness, so difficult to obtain in poetry, while a little doubtful darkness would have been accounted sublime by my new Midas. But, although I wanted to please him, the cardinal was only a secondary consideration, and the handsome Marchioness the principal object. As the Marchioness in her verses had made a pompous enumeration of every physical and moral quality of his eminence, it was of course natural that he should return the compliment, and here my task was easy. At last, having mastered my subject well, I began my work, and giving full career to my imagination and to my feelings, I composed the 10 stanzas, and gave the finishing stroke with these 2 beautiful lines from Ariosto. Le angeliche bellezze nate al cielo, non si possono celar sotto alcun velo. Rather pleased with my production, I presented it the next day to the cardinal, modestly saying that I doubted whether he would accept the authorship of so ordinary a composition. He read the stanzas twice over, without taste or expression, and said at last that they were indeed not much, but exactly what he wanted. He thanked me particularly for the 2 lines from Ariosto, saying that they would assist in throwing the authorship upon himself, as they would prove to the lady for whom they were intended that he had not been able to write them without borrowing. And, as to offer me some consolation, he told me that, in recopying the lines, he would take care to make a few mistakes in the rhythm to complete the illusion. We dined earlier than the day before, and I withdrew immediately after dinner, so as to give him leisure to make a copy of the stanzas before the arrival of the lady. The next evening I met the Marchioness at the entrance of the palace, and offered her my arm to come out of her carriage. The instant she alighted, she said to me, "If ever your stanzas and mine become known in Rome, you may be sure of my enmity." "Madam, I do not understand what you mean." "I expected you to answer me in this manner," replied the Marchioness, "but recollect what I have said." I left her at the door of the reception-room, and thinking that she was really angry with me, I went away in despair. "My stanzas," I said to myself, "are too fiery, They compromise her dignity, and her pride is offended at my knowing the secret of her intrigue with Cardinal S.C. Yet I feel certain that the dread she expresses of my want of discretion is only feigned. It is but a pretext to turn me out of her favour. She has not understood my reserve. What would she have done if I had painted her in the simple apparel of the golden age, without any of those veils which modesty imposes upon her sex? I was sorry I had not done so. I undressed and went to bed. My head was scarcely on the pillow when the Abbé Gama knocked at my door. I pulled the door-string, and coming in he said, "My dear sir, the cardinal wishes to see you, and I am sent by the beautiful Marchioness and Cardinal S.C., who desire you to come down." "I am very sorry, but I cannot go. Tell them the truth, I am ill in bed." As the abbé did not return, I judged that he had faithfully acquitted himself of the commission, and I spent a quiet night. I was not yet dressed in the morning when I received a note from Cardinal S.C. inviting me to dinner, saying that he had just been bled, and that he wanted to speak to me. He concluded by entreating me to come to him early, even if I did not feel well. The invitation was pressing. I could not guess what had caused it, but the tone of the letter did not forebode anything unpleasant. I went to church, where I was sure that Cardinal Acquaviva would see me, and he did. After Mass, his Eminence beckoned to me. "Are you truly ill?" he inquired. "No, Monseigneur, I was only sleepy." "I am very glad to hear it, but you are wrong, for you are loved. Cardinal S.C. has been bled this morning." "I know it, Monseigneur. The Cardinal tells me so in this note, in which he invites me to dine with him, with your Excellency's permission." "Certainly, but this is amusing. I did not know that he wanted a third person." "Will there be a third person?" "I do not know, and I have no curiosity about it." The Cardinal left me, and everybody imagined that his Eminence had spoken to me of state affairs. I went to my new Maecenas, whom I found in bed. "I am compelled to observe strict diet," he said to me. "I shall have to let you dine alone, but you will not lose by it, as my cook does not know it. What I wanted to tell you is that your stanzas are, I am afraid, too pretty, for the Marchioness adores them. If you had read them to me in the same way that she does, I could never have made up my mind to offer them." "But she believes them to be written by your Eminence?" "Of course." "That is the essential point, Monseigneur." "Yes, but what should I do if she took it into her head to compose some new stanzas for me?" "You would answer through the same pen, for you can dispose of me night and day, and rely upon the utmost secrecy." "I beg of you to accept this small present. It is some Negrillo snuff from Habana, which Cardinal Acquaviva has given me." The snuff was excellent, but the object which contained it was still better. It was a splendid gold enamelled box. I received it with respect, and with the expression of the deepest gratitude. If his Eminence did not know how to write poetry, at least he knew how to be generous, and in a delicate manner, and that science is, at least in my estimation, superior to the other for a great nobleman. At noon, and much to my surprise, the beautiful Marchioness made her appearance in the most elegant morning toilette. "If I had known you were in good company," she said to the Cardinal, "I would not have come." "I am sure, dear Marchioness, you will not find our dear Abbé in the way." "No, for I believe him to be honest and true." I kept at a respectful distance, ready to go away with my splendid snuff-box at the first jest she might hurl at me. The Cardinal asked her if she intended to remain to dinner. "Yes," she answered, "but I shall not enjoy my dinner, for I hate to eat alone." "If you would honour him so far, the abbé would keep you company." She gave me a gracious look, but without uttering one word. This was the first time I had anything to do with a woman of quality, and that air of patronage, whatever kindness might accompany it, always puts me out of temper, for I thought it made love out of the question. However, as we were in the presence of the Cardinal, I fancied that she might be right in treating me in that fashion. The table was laid out near the Cardinal's bed, and the Marchioness, who ate hardly anything, encouraged me in my good appetite. "I have told you that the abbé is equal to me in that respect." "I truly believe," answered the Marchioness, "that he does not remain far behind you. But," added she with flattery, "you are more dainty in your tastes." "Would her ladyship be so good as to tell me in what I have appeared to her to be a mere glutton? For in all things I like only dainty and exquisite morsels." "Explain what you mean by saying 'in all things,'" said the Cardinal. Taking the liberty of laughing, I composed a few impromptu verses, in which I named all I thought dainty and exquisite. The Marchioness applauded, saying that she admired my courage. "My courage, madam, is due to you, for I am as timid as a hare when I am not encouraged. You are the author of my impromptu." "I admire you. As for myself, were I encouraged by Apollo himself, I could not compose 4 lines without paper and ink." "Only give way boldly to your genius, madam, and you will produce poetry worthy of heaven." "That is my opinion too," said the cardinal. "I entreat you to give me permission to show your 10 stanzas to the abbé." "They are not very good, but I have no objection provided it remains between us." The cardinal gave me then the stanzas composed by the Marchioness, and I read them aloud with all the expression, all the feeling necessary to such reading. "How well you have read those stanzas," said the Marchioness. "I can hardly believe them to be my own composition. I thank you very much. But have the goodness to give the benefit of your reading to the stanzas which his Eminence has written in answer to mine. They surpass them much." "Do not believe it, my dear abbé," said the cardinal, handing them to me. "Yet try not to let them lose anything through your reading." There was certainly no need of his Eminence enforcing upon me such a recommendation. It was my own poetry. I could not have read it otherwise than in my best style, especially when I had before me the beautiful woman who had inspired them, and when, besides, Bacchus was in me giving courage to Apollo as much as the beautiful eyes of the Marchioness were fanning into an ardent blaze the fire already burning through my whole being. I read the stanzas with so much expression that the cardinal was enraptured, but I brought a deep carnation tint upon the cheeks of the lovely Marchioness when I came to the description of those beauties which the imagination of the poet is allowed to guess at, but which I could not, of course, have gazed upon. She snatched the paper from my hands with passion, saying that I was adding verses of my own. It was true, but I did not confess it. I was all aflame, and the fire was scorching her as well as me. The cardinal having fallen asleep, she rose and went to take a seat on the balcony. I followed her. She had a rather high seat. I stood opposite to her, so that her knee touched the fob pocket in which was my watch. What a position! Taking hold gently of one of her hands, I told her that she had ignited in my soul a devouring flame, that I adored her, and that, unless some hope was left to me of finding her sensible to my sufferings, I was determined to fly away from her for ever. Yes, beautiful Marchioness, pronounce my sentence. I fear you are a libertine and an unfaithful lover. I am neither one nor the other. With these words I folded her in my arms, and I pressed upon her lovely lips, as pure as a rose, an ardent kiss, which she received with the best possible grace. This kiss, the forerunner of the most delicious pleasures, had imparted to my hands the greatest boldness. I was on the point of... But the Marchioness, changing her position, entreated me so sweetly to respect her that, enjoying new voluptuousness through my very obedience, I not only abandoned an easy victory, but I even begged her pardon, which I soon read in the most loving look. She spoke of Lucrezia, and was pleased with my discretion. She then alluded to the cardinal, doing her best to make me believe that there was nothing between them but a feeling of innocent friendship. Of course, I had my opinion on that subject, but it was my interest to appear to believe every word she uttered. We recited together lines from our best poets, and all the time she was still sitting down, and I standing before her, with my looks wrapped in the contemplation of the most lovely charms, to which I remained insensible in appearance, for I had made up my mind not to press her that evening for greater favours than those I had already received. The cardinal, waking from his long and peaceful siesta, got up and joined us in his nightcap, and good-naturedly inquired whether we had not felt impatient at his protected sleep. I remained until dark, and went home highly pleased with my day's work, but determined to keep my ardent desires in check until the opportunity for complete victory offered itself. From that day the charming Marchioness never ceased to give me the marks of her particular esteem, without the slightest constraint. I was reckoning upon the carnival, which was close at hand, feeling certain that the more I should spare her delicacy, the more she would endeavour to find the opportunity of rewarding my loyalty, and of crowning with happiness my loving constancy. But fate ordained otherwise. Dame Fortune turned her back upon me at the very moment when the Pope and Cardinal Acquaviva were thinking of giving me a really good position. The Holy Father had congratulated me upon the beautiful snuff-box presented to me by Cardinal S.C., but he had been careful never to name the Marchioness. Cardinal Acquaviva expressed openly his delight at his brother cardinal having given me a taste of his Negril snuff in so splendid an envelope. The Abbé Gama, finding me so forward on the road to success, did not venture to counsel me any more, and the virtuous Father Georgi gave me but one piece of advice, namely, to cling to the lovely Marchioness and not to make any other acquaintances. Such was my position, truly a brilliant one, when, on Christmas Day, the lover of Barbara Dall'Acqua entered my room, locked the door, and threw himself on the sofa, exclaiming that I saw him for the last time. "I only come to beg of you some good advice." "On what subject can I advise you?" "Take this and read it. It will explain everything." It was a letter from his mistress. The contents were these: "I am pregnant of a child, the pledge of our mutual love. I can no longer have any doubt of it, my beloved, and I forewarn you that I have made up my mind to quit Rome alone, and to go away to die where it may please God, if you refuse to take care of me and save me. I would suffer anything, do anything, rather than let my father discover the truth." "If you are a man of honor," I said, "you cannot abandon the poor girl. Marry her in spite of your father, in spite of her own, and live together honestly. The eternal providence of God will watch over you and help you in your difficulties." My advice seemed to bring calm to his mind, and he left me more composed. At the beginning of January 1744 he called again, looking very cheerful. "I have hired," he said, "the top floor of the house next to Barbara's dwelling. She knows it, and tonight I will gain her apartment through one of the windows of the garret, and we will make all our arrangements to enable me to carry her off. I have made up my mind. I have decided upon taking her to Naples, and I will take with us the servant who, sleeping in the garret, had to be made a confidant of. God speed you, my friend." A week afterwards, towards 11 o'clock at night, he entered my room accompanied by an abbé. "What do you want so late?" "I wish to introduce you to this handsome abbé." I looked up, and to my consternation I recognized Barbara. "Has anyone seen you enter the house?" I inquired. "No, and if we had been seen, what of it? It is only an abbé. We now pass every night together." "I congratulate you." "The servant is our friend. She has consented to follow us, and all our arrangements are completed." "I wish you every happiness. Adieu. I beg you to leave me." 3 or 4 days after that visit, as I was walking with the Abbé Gama towards the Villa Medicis, he told me deliberately that there would be an execution during the night in the Piazza di Spagna. "What kind of execution?" "The Bargello or his lieutenant will come to execute some ordine santissimo, or to visit some suspicious dwelling in order to arrest and carry off some person who does not expect anything of the sort." "How do you know it?" "His Eminence has to know it, for the Pope would not venture to encroach upon his jurisdiction without asking his permission." "And his Eminence has given it?" "Yes, one of the Holy Father's auditors came for that purpose this morning." "But the cardinal might have refused." "Of course, but such a permission is never denied." "And if the person to be arrested happened to be under the protection of the cardinal, what then?" "His Eminence would give timely warning to that person." We changed the conversation, but the news had disturbed me. I fancied that the execution threatened Barbara and her lover, for her father's house was under the Spanish jurisdiction. I tried to see the young man, but I could not succeed in meeting him, and I was afraid lest a visit at his home or at Monsieur Dell'Acqua's dwelling might implicate me. Yet it is certain that this last consideration would not have stopped me if I had been positively sure that they were threatened. Had I felt satisfied of their danger, I would have braved everything. End of Chapter 10, Part 2. Chapter 10, Part 3 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 2, Cleric in Naples. Chapter 10, Part 3. About midnight, as I was ready to go to bed, and just as I was opening my door to take the key from outside, an abbé rushed panting into my room and threw himself on a chair. It was Barbara. I guessed what had taken place, and, foreseeing all the evil consequences her visit might have for me, deeply annoyed and very anxious, I upbraided her for having taken refuge in my room, and entreated her to go away. Fool that I was! Knowing that I was only ruining myself without any chance of saving her, I ought to have compelled her to leave my room. I ought to have called for the servants if she had refused to withdraw. But I had not courage enough, or rather I voluntarily obeyed the decrees of destiny. When she heard my order to go away, she threw herself on her knees, and melting into tears, she begged, she entreated my pity. Where is the heart of steel which is not softened by the tears, by the prayers of a pretty and unfortunate woman? I gave way, but I told her that it was ruin for both of us. No one, she replied, has seen me, I am certain, when I entered the mansion and came up to your room, and I consider my visit here a week ago as most fortunate. Otherwise I never could have known which was your room. Alas, how much better if you had never come! But what has become of your lover? The sbirri have carried him off, as well as the servant. I will tell you all about it. My lover had informed me that a carriage would wait tonight at the foot of the flight of steps before the church of Trinita del Monte, and that he would be there himself. I entered his room through the garret window an hour ago. There I put on this disguise, and, accompanied by the servant, proceeded to meet him. The servant walked a few yards before me, and carried a parcel of my things. At the corner of the street, one of the buckles of my shoes being unfastened, I stopped an instant, and the servant went on, thinking that I was following her. She reached the carriage, got into it, and, as I was getting nearer, the light from a lantern disclosed to me some 30 sbirri. At the same instant, one of them got on the driver's box and drove off at full speed, carrying off the servant, whom they must have mistaken for me, and my lover, who was in the coach awaiting me. What could I do at such a fearful moment? I could not go back to my father's house, and I followed my first impulse which brought me here. And here I am. You tell me that my presence will cause you ruin. If it is so, tell me what to do. I feel I am dying, but find some expedient and I am ready to do anything, even to lay my life down, rather than be the cause of your ruin. But she wept more bitterly than ever. Her position was so sad that I thought it worse even than mine, although I could almost fancy I saw ruin before me, despite my innocence. Let me, I said, conduct you to your father. I feel sure of obtaining your pardon. But my proposal only enhanced her fears. I am lost, she exclaimed. I know my father. Ah, reverend sir, turn me out into the street, and abandon me to my miserable fate. No doubt I ought to have done so, and I would have done it if the consciousness of what was due to my own interest had been stronger than my feeling of pity. But her tears, I have often said it, and those amongst my readers who have experienced it must be of the same opinion. There is nothing on earth more irresistible than two beautiful eyes shedding tears, when the owner of those eyes is handsome, honest, and unhappy. I found myself physically unable to send her away. My poor girl, I said at last, when daylight comes, and that will not be long, for it is past midnight, what do you intend to do? I must leave the palace, she replied, sobbing. In this disguise no one can recognize me. I will leave Rome, and I will walk straight before me until I fall on the ground, dying with grief and fatigue. With these words she fell on the floor. She was choking. I could see her face turn blue. I was in the greatest distress. I took off her neckband and laced her stays under the abbé's dress. I threw cold water in her face, and I finally succeeded in bringing her back to consciousness. The night was extremely cold, and there was no fire in my room. I advised her to get into my bed, promising to respect her. Alas, reverend sir, pity is the only feeling with which I can now inspire anyone. And, to speak the truth, I was too deeply moved, and, at the same time, too full of anxiety to leave room in me for any desire. Having induced her to go to bed, and her extreme weakness preventing her from doing anything for herself, I undressed her and put her to bed, thus proving once more that compassion will silence the most imperious requirements of nature, in spite of all the charms which would, under other circumstances, excite to the highest degree the senses of a man. I lay down near her in my clothes, and woke her at daybreak. Her strength was somewhat restored. She dressed herself alone, and I left my room, telling her to keep quiet until my return. I intended to proceed to her father's house and to solicit her pardon, but, having perceived some suspicious-looking man loitering about the palace, I thought it wise to alter my mind, and went to a coffee-house. I soon ascertained that a spy was watching my movements at a distance, but I did not appear to notice him, and having taken some chocolate and stored a few biscuits in my pocket, I returned towards the palace, apparently without any anxiety or hurry, always followed by the same individual. I judged that the Bargello, having failed in his project, was now reduced to guesswork, and I was strengthened in that view of the case when the gatekeeper of the palace told me, without my asking any question as I came in, that an arrest had been attempted during the night and had not succeeded. While he was speaking, one of the auditors of the Vicar-General called to inquire when he could see the Abbé Gama. I saw that no time was to be lost, and went up to my room to decide upon what was to be done. I began by making the poor girl eat a couple of biscuits soaked in some Canary wine, and I took her afterwards to the top story of the palace, where, leaving her in a not very decent closet, which was not used by anyone, I told her to wait for me. My servant came soon after, and I ordered him to lock the door of my room as soon as he finished cleaning it, and to bring me the key at the Abbé Gama's apartment, where I was going. I found Gama in conversation with the auditor sent by the Vicar-General. As soon as he had dismissed him, he came to me, and ordered his servant to serve the chocolate. When we were left alone, he gave me an account of his interview with the auditor, who had come to entreat his eminence to give orders to turn out of his palace a person who was supposed to have taken refuge in it about midnight. "We must wait," said the abbé, "until the cardinal is visible, but I am quite certain that, if anyone has taken refuge here, unknown to him, his eminence will compel that person to leave the palace." We then spoke of the weather, and other trifles, until my servant brought my key. Judging that I had at least an hour to spare, I bethought myself of a plan which alone could save Barbara from shame and misery. Feeling certain that I was unobserved, I went up to my poor prisoner, and made her write the following words in French. "I am an honest girl, monseigneur, though I am disguised in the dress of an abbé. I entreat your eminence to allow me to give my name only to you and in person. I hope that, prompted by the great goodness of your soul, your eminence will save me from dishonour." I gave her the necessary instructions as to sending the note to the cardinal, assuring her that he would have her brought to him as soon as he read it. "When you are in his presence," I added, "throw yourself on your knees, tell him everything without any concealment, except as regards your having passed the night in my room. You must be sure not to mention that circumstance, for the cardinal must remain in complete ignorance of my knowing anything whatever of this intrigue. Tell him that, seeing your lover carried off, you rushed to his palace and ran upstairs as far as you could go, and that after a most painful night, Heaven inspired you with the idea of writing to him to entreat his pity. I feel certain that, one way or the other, his eminence will save you from dishonour, and it certainly is the only chance you have of being united to the man you love so dearly." She promised to follow my instructions faithfully, and, coming down, I had my hair dressed and went to church, where the cardinal saw me. I then went out and returned only for dinner, during which the only subject of conversation was the adventure of the night. Gama alone said nothing, and I followed his example, but I understood from all the talk going on round the table that the cardinal had taken my poor Barbara under his protection. That was all I wanted, and thinking that I had nothing more to fear, I congratulated myself, in petto, upon my stratagem, which had, I thought, proved a master-stroke. After dinner, finding myself alone with Gama, I asked him what was the meaning of it all, and this is what he told me. A father, whose name I do not know yet, had requested the assistance of the Vicar-General to prevent his son from carrying off a young girl, with whom he intended to leave the States of the Church. The pair had arranged to meet at midnight in this very square, and the vicar, having previously obtained the consent of our cardinal, as I told you yesterday, gave orders to the Bargello to dispose his men in such a way as to catch the young people in the very act of running away, and to arrest them. The orders were executed, but the sbirri found out, when they returned to the Bargello, that they had met with only a half success. The woman who got out of the carriage with the young man not belonged to that species likely to be carried off. Soon afterwards a spy informed the Bargello that, at the very moment the arrest was executed, he had seen a young abbé run away very rapidly and take refuge in his palace, and the suspicion immediately arose that it might be the missing young lady in the disguise of an ecclesiastic. The Bargello reported to the Vicar-General the failure of his men, as well as the account given by the spy, and the prelate, sharing the suspicion of the police, sent to his eminence, our master, requesting him to have the person in question, man or woman, turned out of the palace, unless such persons should happen to be known to his excellency, and therefore above suspicion. Cardinal Acquaviva was made acquainted with these circumstances at 9 this morning through the auditor you met in my room, and he promised to have the person sent away unless she belonged to his household. According to his promise, the cardinal ordered the palace to be searched, but in less than a quarter of an hour the major domo received orders to stop, and the only reason for these new instructions must be this. I am told by the major domo that at 9 o'clock exactly, a very handsome young abbé, whom he immediately judged to be a girl in disguise, asked him to deliver a note to his eminence, and that the cardinal, after reading it, had desired the said abbé be brought to his apartment, which he has not left since. As the order to stop searching the palace was given immediately after the introduction of the abbé to the cardinal, it is easy enough to suppose that this ecclesiastic is no other than the young girl missed by the police, who took refuge in the palace, in which she must have passed the whole night. "I suppose," said I, "that his eminence will give her up today, if not to the Bargello, at least to the vicar general." "No, not even to the Pope himself," answered Gama. "You have not yet a right idea of the protection of our cardinal, and that protection is evidently granted to her, since the young person is not only in the palace of his eminence, but also in his own apartment and under his own guardianship." The whole affair being in itself very interesting, my attention could not appear extraordinary to Gama, however suspicious he might be naturally, and I was certain that he would not have told me anything if he had guessed the share I had taken in the adventure, and the interest I must have felt in it. The next day Gama came to my room with a radiant countenance, and informed me that the cardinal vicar was aware of the ravisher being my friend, and supposed that I was likewise the friend of the girl, as she was the daughter of my French teacher. "Everybody," he added, "is satisfied that you knew the whole affair, and it is natural to suspect that the poor girl spent the night in your room. I admire your prudent reserve during our conversation of yesterday. You kept so well on your guard that I would have sworn you knew nothing whatever of the affair." "And it is the truth," I answered, very seriously. "I have only learned all the circumstances from you this moment. I know the girl, but I have not seen her for 6 weeks, since I gave up my French lessons. I am much better acquainted with the young man, but he never confided his project to me. However, people may believe whatever they please. You say that it is natural for the girl to have passed the night in my room, but you will not mind my laughing in the face of those who accept their own suppositions as realities." "That, my dear friend," said the abbé, "is one of the vices of the Romans. Happy those who can afford to laugh at it, but this slander may do you harm, even in the mind of our cardinal." As there was no performance at the opera that night, I went to the cardinal's reception. I found no difference towards me, either in the cardinal's manners or in those of any other person, and the marchioness was even more gracious than usual. After dinner on the following day, Gama informed me that the cardinal had sent the young girl to a convent, in which she would be well treated at his eminence's expense, and that he was certain that she would leave it only to become the wife of the young doctor. "I should be very happy if it should turn out so," I replied, "for they are both most estimable people." 2 days afterwards I called upon Father Georgi, and he told me, with an air of sorrow, that the great news of the day in Rome was the failure of the attempt to carry off Dell'Acqua's daughter, and that all the honour of the intrigue was given to me, which displeased him much. I told him what I had already told Gama, and he appeared to believe me, but he added that in Rome people did not want to know things as they truly were, but only as they wished them to be. "It is known that you have been in the habit of going every morning to Dell'Acqua's house. It is known that the young man often called on you. That is quite enough. People do not care to know the circumstances which might counteract the slander, but only those likely to give it new force, for slander is vastly relished in the Holy City. Your innocence will not prevent the whole adventure being booked to your account, if in 40 years' time you were proposed as Pope in the conclave." During the following days the fatal adventure began to cause me more annoyance than I could express, for everyone mentioned it to me, and I could see clearly that people pretended to believe what I said only because they did not dare to do otherwise. The Marchioness told me jeeringly that the Signora Dell'Acqua had contracted peculiar obligations towards me, but my sorrow was very great when, during the last days of the carnival, I remarked that Cardinal Acquaviva's manner had become constrained, although I was the only person who observed the change. The noise made by the affair was, however, beginning to subside, when, in the first days of Lent, the cardinal desired me to come to his private room, and spoke as follows: "The affair of the girl Dell'Acqua is now over. It is no longer spoken of, but the verdict of the public is that you and I have profited by the clumsiness of the young man who intended to carry her off. In reality, I care little for such a verdict, for, under similar circumstances, I should always act in a similar manner, and I do not wish to know that which no one can compel you to confess, and which, as a man of honor, you must not admit. If you had no previous knowledge of the intrigue, and had actually turned the girl out of your room, supposing she did come to you, you would have been guilty of a wrong and cowardly action, because you would have sealed her misery for the remainder of her days, and it would not have caused you to escape the suspicion of being an accomplice, while at the same time it would have attached to you the odium of dastardly treachery. Notwithstanding all I have just said, you can easily imagine that, in spite of my utter contempt for all gossiping fools, I cannot openly defy them. I therefore feel myself compelled to ask you not only to quit my service, but even to leave Rome. I undertake to supply you with an honourable pretext for your departure, so as to ensure you the continuation of the respect which you may have secured through the marks of esteem I have bestowed upon you. I promise you to whisper in the ear of any person you may choose, and even to inform everybody that you are going on an important mission which I have entrusted to you. You have only to name the country where you want to go. I have friends everywhere, and can recommend you to such purpose that you will be sure to find employment. My letters of recommendation will be in my own handwriting, and nobody need know where you are going. Meet me tomorrow at the Villa Negroni, and let me know where my letters are to be addressed. You must be ready to start within a week. Believe me, I am sorry to lose you, but the sacrifice is forced upon me by the most absurd prejudice. Go now, and do not let me witness your grief." He spoke the last words because he saw my eyes filling with tears, and he did not give me time to answer. Before leaving his room I had the strength of mind to compose myself, and I put on such an air of cheerfulness that the Abbé Gama, who took me to his room to drink some coffee, complimented me upon my happy looks. "I am sure," he said, "that they are caused by the conversation you have had with his Eminence." "You are right, but you do not know the sorrow at my heart which I try not to show outwardly." "What sorrow?" "I am afraid of failing in a difficult mission which the cardinal has entrusted me with this morning. I am compelled to conceal how little confidence I feel in myself, in order not to lessen the good opinion his Eminence is pleased to entertain of me." "If my advice can be of any service to you, pray dispose of me, but you are quite right to show yourself calm and cheerful. Is it any business to transact in Rome?" "No, it is a journey I shall have to undertake in a week or 10 days." "Which way?" "Towards the west." "Oh, I am not curious to know." I went out alone, and took a walk in the Villa Borghese, where I spent 2 hours wrapped in dark despair. I liked Rome, I was on the high road to fortune, and suddenly I found myself in the abyss, without knowing where to go, and with all my hopes scattered to the winds. I examined my conduct, I judged myself severely, I could not find myself guilty of any crime save of too much kindness, but I perceived how right the good Father Georgi had been. My duty was not only to take no part in the intrigue of the two lovers, but also to change my French teacher the moment I heard of it. But this was like calling in a doctor after death has struck the patient. Besides, young as I was, having no experience yet of misfortune, and still less of the wickedness of society, it was very difficult for me to have that prudence which a man gains only by long intercourse with the world. Where shall I go? This was the question which seemed to me impossible of solution. I thought of it all through the night, and through the morning, but I thought in vain. After Rome, I was indifferent where I went to. In the evening, not caring for any supper, I had gone to my room. The Abbé Gama came to me with a request from the cardinal not to accept any invitation to dinner for the next day, as he wanted to speak to me. I therefore waited upon his Eminence the next day at the Villa Negroni. He was walking with his secretary, whom he dismissed the moment he saw me. As soon as we were alone, I gave him all the particulars of the intrigue of the two lovers, and I expressed in the most vivid manner the sorrow I felt at leaving his service. "I have no hope of success," I added, "for I am certain that fortune will smile upon me only as long as I am near your Eminence." For nearly an hour I told him all the grief with which my heart was bursting, weeping bitterly, yet I could not move him from his decision. Kindly but firmly he pressed me to tell him to what part of Europe I wanted to go, and despair as much as vexation made me name Constantinople. Constantinople? he exclaimed, moving back a step or two. Yes, Monseigneur, Constantinople, I repeated, wiping away my tears. The prelate, a man of great wit, but a Spaniard to the very backbone, after remaining silent a few minutes, said, with a smile, I am glad you have not chosen Isfahan, as I should have felt rather embarrassed. When do you wish to go? This day week, as your eminence has ordered me. Do you intend to sail from Naples or from Venice? From Venice. I will give you such a passport as will be needed, for you will find 2 armies in winter quarters in the Romagna. It strikes me that you may tell everybody that I sent you to Constantinople, for nobody will believe you. This diplomatic suggestion nearly made me smile. The cardinal told me that I should dine with him, and he left me to join his secretary. When I returned to the palace, thinking of the choice I had made, I said to myself, either I am mad, or I am obeying the impulse of a mysterious genius which sends me to Constantinople to work out my fate. I was only astonished that the cardinal had so readily accepted my choice. Without any doubt, I thought, he did not wish me to believe that he had boasted of more than he could achieve in telling me that he had friends everywhere. But to whom can he recommend me in Constantinople? I have not the slightest idea, but to Constantinople I must go. I dined alone with his eminence. He made a great show of peculiar kindness, and I of great satisfaction, for my self-pride, stronger even than my sorrow, forbade me to let anyone guess that I was in disgrace. My deepest grief was, however, to leave the Marchioness, with whom I was in love, and from whom I had not obtained any important favour. 2 days afterwards, the cardinal gave me a passport for Venice, and a sealed letter addressed to Osman Bonneval, Pasha of Caramania, in Constantinople. There was no need of my saying anything to anyone, but, as the cardinal had not forbidden me to do it, I showed the address on the letter to all my acquaintances. The Chevalier de Letze, the Venetian ambassador, gave me a letter for a wealthy Turk, a very worthy man who had been his friend. Don Gaspar and Father Georgi asked me to write to them, but the Abbé Gama laughed, and said he was quite sure I was not going to Constantinople. I went to take my farewell of Donna Cecilia, who had just received a letter from Lucrezia, imparting the news that she would soon be a mother. I also called upon Angelique and Don Francisco, who had lately been married and had not invited me to the wedding. When I called to take Cardinal Acquavivas' final instructions, he gave me a purse containing 100 ounces, worth 700 sequins. I had 300 more, so that my fortune amounted to 1,000 sequins. I kept 200, and for the rest I took a letter of exchange upon a Ragozan who was established in Ancona. I left Rome in the coach with a lady going to Our Lady of Loreto, to fulfill a vow made during a severe illness of her daughter, who accompanied her. The young lady was ugly. My journey was a rather tedious one. End of Chapter 10, Part 3.
Chapter 11 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Reynard. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 2, Cleric in Naples. Chapter 11. My short, but rather too gay visit to Ancona. Cecilia, Marina, Bellino, the Greek slave of the Lazaretto. Bellino discovers himself. I arrived in Ancona on the 25th of February, 1744, and put up at the best inn. Pleased with my room, I told mine host to prepare for me a good meat dinner. But he answered that during Lent all good Catholics eat nothing but fish. The Holy Father has granted me permission to eat meat. Let me see your permission. He gave it to me by word of mouth. Reverend Sir, I am not obliged to believe you. You are a fool. I am master in my own house, and I beg you will go to some other inn. Such an answer, coupled to a most unexpected notice to quit, threw me into a violent passion. I was swearing, raving, screaming, when suddenly a grave-looking individual made his appearance in my room, and said to me, "Sir, you are wrong in calling for meat. When in Ancona, fish is much better. You are wrong in expecting the landlord to believe you on your bare word. And, if you have obtained the permission from the Pope, you have been wrong in soliciting it at your age. You have been wrong in not asking for such permission in writing. You are wrong in calling the host a fool, because it is a compliment that no man is likely to accept in his own house. And finally, you are wrong in making such an uproar." Far from increasing my bad temper, this individual, who had entered my room only to treat me to a sermon, made me laugh. "I willingly plead guilty, sir," I answered, "to all the counts which you allude against me. But it is raining, it is getting late, I am tired and hungry, and therefore you will easily understand that I do not feel disposed to change my quarters. Will you give me some supper, as the landlord refuses to do so?" "No," he replied with great composure, "because I am a good Catholic, and fast. But I will undertake to make it all right for you with the landlord, who will give you a good supper." Thereupon he went downstairs, and I, comparing my hastiness to his calm, acknowledged the man worthy of teaching me some lessons. He soon came up again, informed me that peace was signed, and that I would be served immediately. "Will you not take supper with me?" "No, but I will keep you company." I accepted his offer, and, to learn who he was, I told him my name, giving myself the title of secretary to Cardinal Acquaviva. "My name is Sancio Pico," he said. "I am a Castilian, and the Proveditore of the army of H.C.M., which is commanded by Count de Garja, under the orders of the Generalissimo, the Duke of Modem." My excellent appetite astonished him, and he inquired whether I had dined. "No," said I, and I saw his countenance assume an air of satisfaction. "Are you not afraid such a supper will hurt you?" "On the contrary, I hope it will do me a great deal of good." "Then you have deceived the Pope?" "No, for I did not tell him that I had no appetite, but only that I liked meat better than fish." "If you feel disposed to hear some good music," he said a moment after, "follow me to the next room. The prima donna of Ancona lives there." The words prima donna interested me at once, and I followed him. I saw, sitting before a table, a woman already somewhat advanced in age, with 2 young girls and 2 boys, but I looked in vain for the actress whom Don Sancio Pico at last presented to me in the shape of one of the 2 boys, who was remarkably handsome, and might have been 17. I thought he was a castrato, who, as is the custom in Rome, performed all the parts of a prima donna. The mother presented me to her other son, likewise very good looking, but more manly than the castrato, although younger. His name was Petronio, and, keeping up the transformation of the family, he was the first female dancer at the opera. The eldest girl, who was also introduced to me, was named Cecilia, and studied music. She was 12 years old. The youngest, called Marina, was only 11, and, like her brother, Petronio, was consecrated to the worship of Terpsichore. Both the girls were very pretty. The family came from Bologna, and lived upon the talent of its members. Cheerfulness and amiability replaced wealth with them. Bellino, such was the name of the castrato, yielding to the entreaties of Don Sancio, rose from the table, went to the harpsichord, and sang with the voice of an angel, and with delightful grace. The Castilian listened with his eyes closed in an ecstasy of enjoyment. But I, far from closing my eyes, gazed into Bellino's, which seemed to dart amorous lightnings upon me. I could discover in him some of the features of Lucretia, and the graceful manner of the Marchioness, and everything betrayed a beautiful woman, for his dress concealed, but imperfectly, the most splendid bosom. The consequence was that, in spite of his having been introduced as a man, I fancied that the so-called Bellino was a disguised beauty, and my imagination, taking at once the highest flight, I became thoroughly enamoured. We spent 2 very pleasant hours, and I returned to my room, accompanied by the Castilian. "I intend to leave very early tomorrow morning," he said, "for Sinigaglia, with the Abbé Vilmarcati, but I expect to return for supper the day after tomorrow." I wished him a happy journey, saying that we would most likely meet on the road, as I should probably leave Ancona myself on the same day, after paying a visit to my banker. I went to bed thinking of Bellino, and of the impression he had made upon me. I was sorry to go away without having proved to him that I was not the dupe of his disguise. Accordingly, I was well pleased to see him enter my room in the morning, as soon as I had opened my door. He came to offer me the services of his young brother, Petronio, during my stay in Ancona, instead of my engaging a valet de place. I willingly agreed to the proposal, and sent Petronio to get coffee for all the family. I asked Bellino to sit on my bed with the intention of making love to him, and of treating him like a girl. But the 2 young sisters ran into my room and disturbed my plans. Yet the trio formed before me a very pleasing sight. They represented natural beauty and artless cheerfulness of 3 different kinds: unobtrusive familiarity, theatrical wit, pleasing playfulness, and pretty Bolognese manners, which I witnessed for the first time. All this would have sufficed to cheer me if I had been downcast. Cecilia and Marina were 2 sweet rosebuds, which, to bloom in all their beauty, required only the inspiration of love, and they would certainly have had the preference over Bellino if I had seen him in only the miserable outcast of mankind, or rather the pitiful victim of sacerdotal cruelty. For, in spite of their youth, the 2 amiable girls offered on their dawning bosom the precious image of womanhood. Petronio came with the coffee, which he poured out, and I sent some to the mother, who never left her room. Petronio was a true male harlot by taste and by profession. The species is not scarce in Italy, where the offence is not regarded with the wild and ferocious intolerance of England and Spain. I had given him 1 sequin to pay for the coffee, and told him to keep the change, and, to shew me his gratitude, he gave me a voluptuous kiss with half-open lips, supposing me in a taste which I was very far from entertaining. I disabused him, but he did not seem the least ashamed. I told him to order dinner for 6 persons, but he remarked that he would order it only for 4, as he had to keep his dear mother company. She always took her dinner in bed. Everyone to his taste, I thought, and I let him do as he pleased. 2 minutes after he had gone, the landlord came to my room and said, "Reverend sir, the persons you have invited here have each the appetite of 2 men at least. I give you notice of it because I must charge accordingly." "All right," I replied, "but let us have a good dinner." When I was dressed, I thought I ought to pay my compliments to the compliant mother. I went to her room and congratulated her upon her children. She thanked me for the present I had given to Petronio, and began to make me the confidant of her distress. "The manager of the theatre," she said, "is a miser who has given us only 50 Roman crowns for the whole carnival. We have spent them for our living, and to return to Bologna we shall have to walk and beg our way." Her confidence moved my pity, so I took a gold quadruple from my purse and offered it to her. She wept for joy and gratitude. "I promise you another gold quadruple, madam," I said, "if you will confide in me entirely. Confess that Bellino is a pretty woman in disguise." "I can assure you it is not so, although he has the appearance of a woman." "Not only the appearance, madam, but the tone, the manners. I am a good judge." "Nevertheless, he is a boy, for he has had to be examined before he could sing on the stage here." "And who examined him?" "My Lord Bishop's chaplain." "A chaplain?" "Yes, and you may satisfy yourself by inquiring from him." "The only way to clear my doubts would be to examine him myself." "You may, if he has no objection, but truly I cannot interfere, as I do not know what your interests are." "They are quite natural." I returned to my room, and sent Petronio for a bottle of Cyprus wine. He brought the wine and 7 sequins, the change for the doubloon I had given him. I divided them between Bellino, Cecilia, and Marina, and begged the 2 young girls to leave me alone with their brother. "Bellino, I am certain that your natural conformation is different from mine. My dear, you are a girl." "I am a man, but a castrato. I have been examined." "Allow me to examine you likewise, and I will give you a doubloon." "I cannot, for it is evident that you love me, and such love is condemned by religion." "You did not raise these objections with the bishop's chaplain?" "He was an elderly priest, and besides, he only just glanced at me." "I will know the truth," said I, extending my hand boldly. But he repulsed me, and rose from his chair. His obstinacy vexed me, for I had already spent 15 or 16 sequins to satisfy my curiosity. I began my dinner with a very bad humour, but the excellent appetite of my pretty guests brought me round, and I soon thought that, after all, cheerfulness was better than sulking, and I resolved to make up for my disappointment with the 2 charming sisters, who seemed well disposed to enjoy a frolic. I began by distributing a few innocent kisses, right and left, as I sat between them near a good fire, eating chestnuts, which we wetted with Cyprus wine. But very soon my greedy hands touched every part which my lips could not kiss, and Cecilia, as well as Marina, delighted in the game. Seeing that Bellino was smiling, I kissed him likewise, and his half-open ruffle attracting my hand, I ventured and went in without resistance. The chisel of Praxiteles had never carved a finer bosom. "Oh, this is enough!" I exclaimed. "I can no longer doubt that you are a beautifully formed woman." "It is," he replied, "the defect of all castrati." "No, it is the perfection of all handsome women. Bellino, believe me, I am enough of a good judge to distinguish between the deformed breast of a castrato and that of a beautiful woman, and your alabaster bosom belongs to a young beauty of 17 summers. Who does not know that love, inflamed by all that can excite it, never stops in young people until it is satisfied, and that one favour granted kindles the wish for a greater one? I had begun well. I tried to go further, and to smother with burning kisses that which my hand was pressing so ardently. But the false Bellino, as if he had only just been aware of the illicit pleasure I was enjoying, rose and ran away. Anger increased in me the ardour of love, and feeling the necessity of calming myself, either by satisfying my ardent desires, or by evaporating them, I begged Cecilia, Bellino's pupil, to sing a few Neapolitan airs. I then went out to call upon the banker, from whom I took a letter of exchange at sight upon Bologna, for the amount I had to receive from him, and on my return, after a light supper with the 2 young sisters, I prepared to go to bed, having previously instructed Petronio to order a carriage for the morning. I was just locking my door, when Cecilia, half undressed, came in to say that Bellino begged me to take him to Rimini, where he was engaged to sing in an opera to be performed after Easter. Go and tell him, my dear little seraph, that I am ready to do what he wishes, if he will only grant me, in your presence, what I desire. I want to know for a certainty whether he is a man or a woman. She left me, and returned soon, saying that Bellino had gone to bed, but that if I would postpone my departure for 1 day only, he promised to satisfy me on the morrow. Tell me the truth, Cecilia, and I will give you 6 sequins. I cannot earn them, for I have never seen him naked, and I cannot swear to his being a girl. But he must be a man, otherwise he would not have been allowed to perform here. Well, I will remain until the day after tomorrow, provided you keep me company tonight. Do you love me very much? Very much indeed, if you show yourself very kind. I will be very kind, for I love you dearly likewise. I will go and tell my mother. Of course you have a lover. I never had one. She left my room, and in a short time came back full of joy, saying that her mother believed me an honest man. She of course meant a generous one. Cecilia locked the door, and throwing herself in my arms, covered me with kisses. She was pretty, charming, but I was not in love with her, and I was not able to say to her as to Lucretia, "You have made me so happy." But she said it herself, and I did not feel much flattered, although I pretended to believe her. When I woke up in the morning, I gave her a tender salutation, and presenting her with 3 doubloons, which must have particularly delighted the mother, I sent her away without losing my time in promising everlasting constancy. A promise as absurd as it is trifling, and which the most virtuous man ought never to make even to the most beautiful of women. After breakfast, I sent for mine host, and ordered an excellent supper for 5 persons, feeling certain that Don Sancio, whom I expected in the evening, would not refuse to honour me by accepting my invitation, and with the idea I made up my mind to go without my dinner. The Bolognese family did not require to imitate my diet to ensure a good appetite for the evening. I then summoned Bellino to my room, and claimed the performance of his promise, but he laughed, remarked that the day was not past yet, and said that he was certain of travelling with me. I fairly warn you that you cannot accompany me unless I am fully satisfied. Well, I will satisfy you. Shall we go and take a walk together? Willingly. I will dress myself. While I was waiting for him, Marina came in, with a dejected countenance, inquiring how she had deserved my contempt. Cecilia has passed the night with you. Bellino will go with you tomorrow. I am the most unfortunate of us all. Do you want money? No, for I love you. But Marinetta, you are too young. I am much stronger than my sister. Perhaps you have a lover. Oh, no. Very well, we can try this evening. Good. Then I will tell mother to prepare clean sheets for tomorrow morning. Otherwise everybody here would know that I slept with you. I could not help admiring the fruits of a theatrical education, and was much amused. Bellino came back. We went out together, and we took our walk towards the harbour. There were several vessels at anchor, and among them a Venetian ship, and a Turkish tartan. We went on board the first, which we visited with interest, but, not seeing anyone of my acquaintance, we rowed towards the Turkish tartan, where the most romantic surprise awaited me. The first person I met on board was the beautiful Greek woman I had left in Ancona 7 months before, when I went away from the lazaretto. She was seated near the old captain, of whom I inquired, without appearing to notice his handsome slave, whether he had any fine goods to sell. He took us to his cabin, but, as I cast a glance towards the charming Greek, she expressed by her looks all her delight at such an unexpected meeting. I pretended not to be pleased with the goods shown by the Turk, and, under the impulse of inspiration, I told him that I would willingly buy something pretty which would take the fancy of his better half. He smiled, and the Greek slave having whispered a few words to him, he left the cabin. The moment he was out of sight, this new Aspasia threw herself in my arms, saying, "Now is your time." I would not be found wanting in courage, and taking the most convenient position in such a place, I did to her in one instant that which her old master had not done in 5 years. I had not yet reached the goal of my wishes, when the unfortunate girl, hearing her master, tore herself from my arms with a deep sigh, and placing herself cunningly in front of me, gave me time to repair the disorder of my dress, which might have cost me my life, or at least all I possessed, to compromise the affair. In that curious situation, I was highly amused at the surprise of Bellino, who stood there trembling like an aspen leaf. The trifles chosen by the handsome slave cost me only 30 sequins. "Spolates," she said to me in her own language, and the Turk telling her that she ought to kiss me, she covered her face with her hands and ran away. I left the ship more sad than pleased, for I regretted that, in spite of her courage, she should have enjoyed only an incomplete pleasure. As soon as we were in our rowboat, Bellino, who had recovered from his fright, told me that I had just made him acquainted with a phenomenon, the reality of which he could not admit, and which gave him a very strange idea of my nature. That, as far as the Greek girl was concerned, he could not make her out, unless I should assure him that every woman in her country was like her. "How unhappy they must be," he added. "Do you think," I asked, "that coquettes are happier?" "No, but I think that when a woman yields to love, she should not be conquered before she had fought with her own desires. She should not give way to the first impulse of her lustful desire, and abandon herself to the first man who takes her fancy, like an animal, the slave of sense. You must confess that the Greek woman has given you an evident proof that you had taken her fancy, but that she has at the same time given you a proof not less certain of her beastly lust, and of an effrontery which exposed her to the shame of being repulsed. For she could not possibly know whether you would feel as well disposed for her as she felt for you. She is very handsome, and it all turned out well, but the adventure has thrown me into a whirlpool of agitation which I cannot yet control. I might easily have put a stop to Bellino's perplexity, and rectified the mistake he was labouring under, but such a confession would not have ministered to my self-love, and I held my peace. For, if Bellino happened to be a girl, as I suspected, I wanted her to be convinced that I attached, after all, but very little importance to the great affair, and that it was not worth while employing cunning expedients to obtain it. We returned to the inn, and, towards evening, hearing Don Sancio's travelling carriage roll into the yard, I hastened to meet him, and told him that I hoped he would excuse me if I had felt certain that he would not refuse me the honour of his company to supper with Bellino. He thanked me politely for the pleasure I was so delicately offering him, and accepted my invitation. The most exquisite dishes, the most delicious wines of Spain, and, more than everything else, the cheerfulness and the charming voices of Bellino and of Cecilia gave the Castilian 5 delightful hours. He left me at midnight, saying that he could not declare himself thoroughly pleased unless I promised to sup with him the next evening with the same guests. It would compel me to postpone my departure for another day, but I accepted. As soon as Don Sancio had gone, I called upon Bellino to fulfil his promise, but he answered that Marinetta was waiting for me, and that, as I was not going away, the next day, he would find an opportunity of satisfying my doubts, and wishing me a good night, he left the room. Marinetta, as cheerful as a lark, ran to lock the door, and came back to me, her eyes beaming with ardour. She was more formed than Cecilia, although 1 year younger, and seemed anxious to convince me of her superiority, but, thinking that the fatigue of the preceding night might have exhausted my strength, she unfolded all the amorous ideas of her mind, explained at length all she knew of the great mystery she was going to enact with me, and of all the contrivances she had had recourse to in order to acquire her imperfect knowledge, the whole interlarded with the foolish talk natural of her age. I made out that she was afraid of my not finding her a maiden, and of my reproaching her about it. Her anxiety pleased me, and I gave her a new confidence by telling her that nature had refused to many young girls what is called maidenhood, and that only a fool could be angry with a girl for such a reason. My science gave her courage and confidence, and I was compelled to acknowledge that she was very superior to her sister. "I am delighted you find me so," she said. "We must not sleep at all throughout the night." "Sleep, my darling, will prove our friend, and our strength renewed by repose will reward you in the morning for what you may suppose lost time." And truly, after a quiet sleep, the morning was for her a succession of fresh triumphs, and I crowned her happiness by sending her away with 3 doubloons, which she took to her mother, and which gave the good woman an insatiable desire to contract new obligations towards Providence. I went out to get some money from the banker, as I did not know what might happen during my journey. I had enjoyed myself, but I had spent too much. Yet there was Bellino, who, if a girl, was not to find me less generous than I had been with the 2 younger sisters. It was to be decided during the day, and I fancied that I was sure of the result. There are some persons who pretend that life is only a succession of misfortunes, which is as much as to say that life itself is a misfortune. But if life is a misfortune, death must be exactly the reverse, and therefore death must be happiness, since death is the very reverse of life. That deduction may appear too finely drawn, but those who say that life is a succession of misfortunes are certainly either ill or poor. For, if they enjoyed good health, if they had cheerfulness in their heart, and money in their purse, if they had for their enjoyment a Cecilia, a Marinetta, and even a more lovely beauty in perspective, they would soon entertain a very different opinion of life. I hold them to be a race of pessimists, recruited amongst beggarly philosophers and knavish, atrabilious theologians. If pleasure does exist, and if life is necessary to enjoy pleasure, then life is happiness. There are misfortunes, as I know by experience, but the very existence of such misfortunes proves that the sum total of happiness is greater. Because a few thorns are to be found in a basket full of roses, is the existence of those beautiful flowers to be denied? No, it is a slander to deny that life is happiness. when I am in a dark room, it pleases me greatly to see through a window an immense horizon before me. As supper time was drawing near, I went to Don Sancio, whom I found in magnificently furnished apartments. The table was loaded with silver plate, and his servants were in livery. He was alone, but all the guests arrived soon after me. Cecilia, Marina, and Bellino, who, either by caprice or from taste, was dressed as a woman. The two young sisters, prettily arranged, looked charming, but Bellino, in his female costume, so completely threw them into the shade that my last doubt vanished. "Are you satisfied," I said to Don Sancio, "that Bellino is a woman?" "Woman or man, what do I care? I think he is a very pretty castrato, and I have seen many as good looking as he is." "But are you sure he is a castrato?" "Valgame Dios," answered the grave Castilian, "I have not the slightest wish to ascertain the truth." Oh, how widely different our thoughts were! I admired in him the wisdom of which I was so much in need, and did not venture upon any more indiscreet questions. During the supper, however, my greedy eyes could not leave that charming being. My vicious nature caused me to feel intense voluptuousness in believing him to be of that sex to which I wanted him to belong. Don Sancio's supper was excellent, and, as a matter of course, superior to mine. Otherwise the pride of the Castilian would have felt humbled. As a general rule, men are not satisfied with what is good. They want the best, or, to speak more to the point, the most. He gave us white truffles, several sorts of shellfish, the best fish of the Adriatic, dry champagne, Peralta, sherry, and Pedro Ximenez wines. After that supper, worthy of Lucilius, Bellino sang with a voice of such beauty that it deprived us of the small amount of reason left in us by the excellent wine. His movements, the expression of his looks, his gait, his walk, his countenance, his voice, and above all, my own instinct, which told me that I could not possibly feel for a castrato what I felt for Bellino, confirmed me in my hopes. Yet it was necessary that my eyes should ascertain the truth. After many compliments and 1,000 thanks, we took leave of the grand Spaniard, and went to my room, where the mystery was at last to be unravelled. I called upon Bellino to keep his word, or I threatened to leave him alone the next morning at daybreak. I took him by the hand, and we seated ourselves near the fire. I dismissed Cecilia and Marina, and I said to him, "Bellino, everything must have an end. You have promised. It will soon be over. If you are what you represent yourself to be, I will let you go back to your own room. If you are what I believe you to be, and if you consent to remain with me tonight, I will give you 100 sequins, and we will start together tomorrow morning. You must go alone, and forgive me if I cannot fulfill my promise. I am what I told you, and I can neither reconcile myself to the idea of exposing my shame before you, nor lay myself open to the terrible consequences of what might follow the solution of your doubts." "There can be no consequences, since there will be an end to it at the moment I have assured myself that you are unfortunate enough to be what you say, and, without ever mentioning the circumstances again, I promise to take you with me tomorrow, and to leave you at Rimini." "No, my mind is made up. I cannot satisfy your curiosity." Driven to madness by his words, I was very near using violence, but, subduing my angry feelings, I endeavoured to succeed by gentle means, and by going straight to the spot where the mystery could be solved. I was very near it, when his hand opposed a very strong resistance. I repeated my efforts, but Bellino, rising suddenly, repulsed me, and I found myself undone. After a few moments of calm, thinking I should take him by surprise, I extended my hand, but I drew back terrified, for I fancied that I had recognized in him a man, and a degraded man, contemptible less on account of his degradation than for the want of feeling I thought I could read on his countenance. Disgusted, confused, and almost blushing for myself, I sent him away. His sisters came to my room, but I dismissed them, sending word to their brother that he might go with me without any fear of further indiscretion on my part. Yet, in spite of the conviction I thought I had acquired, Bellino, even such as I believe him to be, filled my thoughts. I could not make it out. Early the next morning I left Ancona with him, distracted by the tears of the two charming sisters, and loaded with the blessings of the mother, who, with beads in her hand, mumbled her paternoster, and repeated her constant theme, Dio Providere. The trust placed in Providence by most of those persons who earn their living by some profession forbidden by religion, is neither absurd, nor false, nor deceitful. It is real, and even godly, for it flows from an excellent source. Whatever may be the ways of Providence, human beings must always acknowledge it in its action, and those who call upon Providence, independently of all external consideration, must, at the bottom, be worthy, although guilty of transgressing its laws. Pulchra laverna, da mihi fallere, da justo sanctoque videri, noctem peccatis, et fraudibus objice nubem. Such was the way in which, in the days of Horace, robbers addressed their goddess. And I recollect a Jesuit who told me once that Horace would not have known his own language if he had said justo sanctoque. But there were ignorant men even amongst the Jesuits, and robbers most likely have but little respect for the rules of grammar. The next morning I started with Bellino, who, believing me to be undeceived, could suppose that I would not show any more curiosity about him. But we had not been a quarter of an hour together when he found out his mistake, for I could not let my looks fall upon his splendid eyes without feeling in me a fire which the sight of a man could not have ignited. I told him that all his features were those of a woman, and that I wanted the testimony of my eyes before I could feel perfectly satisfied, because the protuberance I had felt in a certain place might be only a freak of nature. Should it be the case, I added, I should have no difficulty in passing over a deformity which, in reality, is only laughable. Bellino, the impression you produce upon me, this sort of magnetism, your bosom worthy of Venus herself, which you have once abandoned to my eager hand, the sound of your voice, every movement of yours, assure me that you do not belong to my sex. Let me see for myself, and, if my conjectures are right, depend upon my faithful love. If, on the contrary, I find that I have been mistaken, you can rely upon my friendship. If you refuse me, I shall be compelled to believe that you are cruelly enjoying my misery, and that you have learned in the most accursed school that the best way of preventing a young man from curing himself of an amorous passion is to excite it constantly. But you must agree with me that, to put such tyranny in practice, it is necessary to hate the person it is practised upon, and if that be so, I ought to call upon my reason to give me the strength necessary to hate you likewise. I went on speaking for a long time. Bellino did not answer, but he seemed deeply moved. At last I told him that, in the fearful state to which I was reduced by his resistance, I should be compelled to treat him without any regard for his feelings, and find out the truth by force. He answered with much warmth and dignity, "Recollect that you are not my master, that I am in your hands because I had faith in your promise, and that, if you use violence, you will be guilty of murder. Order the postilion to stop. I will get out of the carriage, and you may rely upon my not complaining of your treatment." Those few words were followed by a torrent of tears, a sight which I never could resist. I felt myself moved in the most inmost recesses of my soul, and I almost thought that I had been wrong. I say almost, because, had I been convinced of it, I would have thrown myself at his feet entreating pardon. But, not feeling myself competent to stand in judgment in my own cause, I satisfied myself by remaining dull and silent, and I never uttered one word until we were only half a mile from Sinigaglia, where I intended to take supper and to remain for the night. Having fought long enough with my own feelings, I said to him, "We might have spent a little time in Rimini, like good friends, if you had felt any friendship for me. For, with a little kind compliance, you could have easily cured me of my passion." "It would not cure you," answered Bellino courageously, but with a sweetness of tone which surprised me. "No, you would not be cured, whether you found me to be a man or woman, for you are in love with me independently of my sex, and the certainty you would acquire would make you furious. In such a state, should you find me inexorable, you would very likely give way to excesses which would afterwards cause you deep sorrow." "You expect to make me admit that you are right, but you are completely mistaken, for I feel that I should remain perfectly calm, and that by complying with my wishes you would gain my friendship." "I tell you again that you would become furious." "Bellino, that which has made me furious is the sight of your charms, either too real or too completely deceiving, the power of which you cannot affect to ignore. You have not been afraid to ignite my amorous fury. How can you expect me to believe you now, when you pretend to fear it, and when I am only asking you to let me touch a thing, which, if it be as you say, will only disgust me?" "Ah, disgust you! I am quite certain of the contrary. Listen to me. Were I a girl, I feel I could not resist loving you, but, being a man, it is my duty not to grant what you desire, for your passion, now very natural, would then become monstrous. Your ardent nature would be stronger than your reason, and your reason itself would easily come to the assistance of your senses and of your nature. That violent clearing up of the mystery, were you to obtain it, would leave you deprived of all control over yourself. Disappointed in not finding what you had expected, you would satisfy your passion upon that which you would find, and the result would, of course, be an abomination. How can you, intelligent as you are, flatter yourself that, finding me to be a man, you could all at once cease to love me? Would the charms which you now see in me cease to exist then? Perhaps their power would, on the contrary, be enhanced, and your passion, becoming brutal, would lead you to take any means your imagination suggested to gratify it. You would persuade yourself that you might change me into a woman, or, what is worse, that you might change yourself into one. Your passion would invent 1,000 sophisms to justify your love, decorated with the fine appellation of friendship, and you would not fail to allege hundreds of similarly disgusting cases in order to excuse your conduct. You would certainly never find me compliant, and how am I to know that you would not threaten me with death? Nothing of the sort would happen, Bellino, I answered, rather tired of the length of his argument. Positively nothing, and I am sure that you are exaggerating your fears. Yet I am bound to tell you that, even if all you say should happen, it seems to me that to allow what can strictly be considered only as a temporary fit of insanity would prove a less evil than to render incurable a disease of the mind which reason would soon cut short. Thus does a poor philosopher reason when he takes it into his head to argue at those periods during which a passion raging in his soul makes all its faculties wander. To reason well, we must be under the sway neither of love nor of anger, for those two passions have one thing in common, which is that, in their excess, they lower us to the condition of brutes, acting only under the influence of their predominating instinct, and, unfortunately, we are never more disposed to argue than when we feel ourselves under the influence of either of those two powerful human passions. We arrived at Sinigaglia late at night, and I went to the best inn and, after choosing a comfortable room, ordered supper. As there was but one bed in the room, I asked Bellino, in as calm a tone as I could assume, whether he would have a fire lighted in another chamber, and my surprise may be imagined when he answered quietly that he had no objection to sleep in the same bed with me. Such an answer, however unexpected, was necessary to dispel the angry feelings under which I was labouring. I guessed that I was near the denouement of the romance, but I was very far from congratulating myself, for I did not know whether the denouement would prove agreeable or not. I felt, however, a real satisfaction at having conquered, and was sure of my self-control, in case the senses, my natural instinct, led me astray. But, if I found myself in the right, I thought I could expect the most precious favours. We sat down to supper opposite each other, and during the meal, his words, his countenance, the expression of his beautiful eyes, his sweet and voluptuous smile, everything seemed to announce that he had had enough of playing a part which must have proved as painful to him as to me. A weight was lifted off my mind, and I managed to shorten the supper as much as possible. As soon as we had left the table, my amiable companion called for a night lamp, undressed himself, and went to bed. I was not long in following him, and the reader will soon know the nature of a denouement so long and so ardently desired. In the meantime, I beg to wish him as happy a night as the one which was then awaiting me.
End of Chapter 11.